A boy with no powers in a group full of heroes is kicked out because he's useless and not much help to the team. Now, he has nowhere to go, no money to spare, and it seems he's also terrible at any combat skill. A boy recounts the story of Fenrir, an S-level monster capable of single-handedly destroying a large city. Once, a village that was constantly attacked by this beast spent all its money to hire the boy's group, the Blazing Dragon Fangs. On that fateful night, Fenrir suddenly appeared out of nowhere and flung a boy who was watching the team's movements far into the air. The leader of the Blazing Dragon Fangs commanded Bandana to spring into action. She then shot her metallic cable around the beast's body to trap it. However, Fenrir bit the cable and hurled the girl against the wall, causing a severe injury. The group's healer quickly sprang into action to restore their ally. Back in the fight, Bandana immobilized the wolf again, allowing the leader to strike the beast with his flaming sword, setting it ablaze and securing victory for the team. According to the boy narrating the story, Bandana was the Swift Ranger, Marlefis the Priestess, and Golnova the Fiery Warrior. After defeating Fenrir, the Blazing Dragon Fangs became local heroes. The boy who was removed from the fight at the outset, and who tells us about this battle, believes his story is somewhat unusual, that of a powerless man among heroes, performing menial tasks on a journey to save the world. After their well-deserved victory, the team enjoyed a hearty meal. However, after biting into a piece of meat, Golnova declared it trash and tossed it away, complaining about the village's poor food quality. The youngest boy hurried to clean up the mess the leader had made, so Golnova demanded that Kerr cook something decent for him. With a smile, the young lad assured he would handle it, while Bandana noted they should enjoy it as it would be their last meal from Kerr. The young boy, puzzled, asked what they meant by that, to which Golnova bluntly stated the kid was too slow to realize he was being fired, as he was so feeble he couldn't even kill a cramping slime pup. Marlefis reminded him that according to the laws of this world, teams must consist of 4 members, meaning if they truly wanted to become stronger, they needed to recruit a high-level mage to raise the team's caliber. Not missing the chance for a pun, Bandana pointed out that although Kerr might carry their baggage, he was ironically the biggest baggage of all. As a last resort, Kerr literally begged the leader for mercy to stay on the team, but Golnova kicked him in the stomach and told him to shut up. Following this, Kerr reflected that his story was all too common, that of a powerless boy who traveled with strong heroes until he was dismissed and had nowhere else to go. After hitching a ride on a cart, Kerr arrived in a city with just a few coins from his last salary in the newly promoted SS rank team, Blazing Dragon Fangs, and went to the Hallow Work branch to find a job. Upon entering, he was startled to be welcomed by an employee to the Samela branch of Hallow Workstation. As the boy was looking for employment, she explained he needed to undergo an interview and an aptitude test. Sitting down to begin the process, he was asked for his name and age, which he provided as Kurt Rawkins, 15 years old. Answering further questions, he was born in Haste Village in the Sheen Mountains and worked as a jack of all trades for the recently promoted SS rank team, Blazing Dragon Fangs. Although he had been fired, the employee believed having this service on his resume was a significant advantage for him, making Kerr feel grateful that Golnova and his former teammates had afforded him this opportunity. Next, Kurt had to undergo an aptitude test, which was a talent granted to him by God, in an attempt to discover his hidden talents. Aptitudes ranged from G rank to SSS, and these levels distinguished the boys from the men, as while a D rank might not cut steel with a certain sword, an A rank could possibly do so using the same blade. Kurt hoped for a major turnaround in his life with this test, but the results indicated he was no higher than G rank in all respects. In summary, the boy was a total underachiever and likely destined for some routine 6x1 shift life. But the woman remembered they hadn't tested his forging and alchemy capabilities because the technician wasn't present, so Kerr would have to wait about a week to see if he was good at that. The problem was that the boy didn't have enough money to stay in the city for that long, so she thought of another test and asked him to lift a sandbag that was in the room. Upon touching the bag, Kerr felt his mana being drained, and he managed to lift the object, but the weight caused his back to bend forward. Nevertheless, the test administrator stated he should be strong enough to handle some construction jobs. Speaking of which, a border town in the Margraviate of Takon was looking for people to repair its walls, and Kerr was pleased to have found a job. Later, as he approached the construction foreman with the introduction letter he had been given, the man glanced at the lad's frail frame and doubted his capability. But since he was short on personnel, it would have to do. Thus, he passed the instructions to Kerr to make cement and repair the wall. Kerr was about to ask if he should infuse the cement with mana to strengthen it, but he was cut off by the foreman, who would return in 3 hours to check on the situation and expected the worker to have used at least half a barrel by then, with payment depending on performance. As he watched his boss leave, Kerr reflected that infusing mana was such a common procedure that the man probably didn't think it necessary to explain. Honestly, he was surprised that half a barrel was considered enough. But regardless, he promised to give his best in this job. 3 hours later, the boss came back to check in and was utterly astounded by what the kid had accomplished. Kerr apologized, having run out of cement, but that was hardly the issue. In reality, the fellow Kurt Rockins had managed to repair a third of the massive western wall in just that short time. Disbelieving, the adult questioned how the boy reached the higher parts without any scaffolding or ladders nearby, and Kerr explained that he put the cement on the end of a very long stick. Conceding after initially underestimating the skinny kid, the boss asked how much longer the young man planned to work there. Kerr confessed that staying for a week would be ideal. With that, the man let the employee off and handed him a bag of coins, the most he had on him, promising to pass on the rest later. Kerr was stunned to receive so much money, being used to just scraps from his former group, and it greatly motivated him. 3 days later, like the boss, everyone passing by the north and west walls could see and were incredulous at how quickly they were repaired. That day, the contractor told Kerr that he didn't need to come from tomorrow onwards, as the kid had simply fixed the entire wall, leaving those who relied on that work for food out of a job. Nevertheless, as a small consolation, the man noted that Kurt's performance was of a typical SS rank for this type of job, so he gave the rest of the payment to the boy and recommended that he look for another job in the capital. Interestingly, despite his excellent performance, Kurt returned to Hallow feeling like a failure, as he felt ultimately kicked out. In the middle of another conversation with the clerk, he saw a beautiful girl causing trouble with an attendant. Kerr's interviewer went over to settle the dispute and learned that the customer wanted to hire a miner but insisted on paying based on good results without any advance payment for a mountain, with no guarantees. Since that was the case, the employee suggested the client recruit investors to develop the mine, but she argued that the mountain would be confiscated if she didn't pay the taxes within a week. Interrupting the dialogue uninvited, Kurt offered to do the job, as he always dug in the mines of his village. But the contractor was not pleased with the worker's ant-like physique, preferring a burly dwarf with a tough look. The problem was, as the employee informed, the woman would have to shell out 10 silver coins for the dwarf, which she made it clear she was unwilling to do, so the deal was to take this kid instead. Finally, after the client left dissatisfied with her new employee, the workstation clerk commented to her colleague that Kurt was too nice. With that adorable look, he could easily work in some leisure lodging, if you catch my drift. Hearing that nonsense, the friend asked Miss Kershell to get a grip and handed her the card with the rest of the payment that the boy was supposed to receive for the wall repair. The woman glanced at the value of 200 coins and flipped out, so much so that she lost her balance and fell backward after tripping over the sandbags that Kerr had lifted. In fact, the colleague remarked that those weren't sandbags, but rather bags used to measure a person's mana, and they get heavier the more magical energy a person has, though they usually don't react to ordinary people. Actually, it takes mana at the level of a court mage to activate those bags. Hearing this, Kershell picked up the bag and felt the weight, though not too much. At the moment, she remembered Kurt struggling greatly to lift that thing and began to wonder just who this guy was. Speaking of the man, he was led to work in a more remote area where there was just a small tent, where he and the boss were supposed to sleep together, according to her. Kurt stated that he couldn't share a tent with a woman as beautiful as Miss Ulyssia. This statement left the woman utterly embarrassed, thinking the kid was mocking her, but Kurt assured her that he had never seen anyone as beautiful as her in his extensive life of 15 years. Ulyssia didn't want to hear it and told the boy to stop talking. Soon after, she mentioned that she had been an adventurer since she was 10 years old, so there was no way she could be considered beautiful. With that, she handed the employee some poorly wrapped food, and Kurt thought it was great, considering it had been a long time since anyone had cooked anything for him. He thought to himself that Golnova and the others never ate with him, unlike this new boss who seemed pretty cool. At night, lying awake, the boy couldn't sleep and decided to turn to see if the boss lady had fallen asleep. When he laid eyes on the boss, he noticed she was only wearing underwear on the lower part of her body, forcing the poor kid to cover his mouth to muffle the squeak he let out. After that, he lamented that Ulysses was so naive. After all, he was a man. Pretending to be asleep, the woman thought to herself that she had used exactly that strategy to find out if Kurt was the type to attack her. But he turned out to be really nice, as well as handsome and fun to tease. The next day, she found out that her employee had slept outside the tent all night and noticed that he had fixed the button on her coat. Grateful, Ulysses thought maybe Kurt was in the wrong job. But since he was there, she announced that they would start work soon, as she needed to earn 10 gold coins that week. For that, she planned to start digging somewhere nearby. But Kurt pointed out that she wouldn't find any ore if she just dug randomly, and that it would be better if he took a look to see if he could find something. As the boss finally gave in, the miner discovered a crystal that alone must be worth about 3 gold coins. Some time later, Kurt examined the surrounding rocks in record time and extracted a large quantity of crystals. Impressed, the boss asked if the next step was to sell these items, but he explained that all but the first were too small to be of much value. The real deal was to transform them into magical crystals. Ulysses thought there were fewer than 10 magical artisans in the kingdom capable of this service, but in a matter of seconds, her new employee performed the process with monstrous ease, usually taking an hour to complete. As night approached, Ulysses bid the boy farewell to sell the magical crystals and planned to return the next morning, while Kurt decided to stay and do some things around there. Watching the boy wave goodbye, the woman struggled not to melt from the cuteness of the lad. Upon arriving in town to sell the items, Ulysses was asked at the counter about the documents for selling foreign crystals, but she informed them that these were produced domestically. Confused, the soldier asked which workshop she belonged to, so she showed a necklace proving she was an adventurer directly serving the royal family. With that, she gained access to a teleportation stone to go to the capital. Since Ulysses was a former adventurer who served the royalty, these people wouldn't believe her even if she told the truth. Next, Ulysses visited a friend and asked her to buy some of the crystals. The girl assessed that the shine of one of the sample pieces wasn't very strong, so it probably wasn't worth much, perhaps about 10 silver. Ulysses had anticipated some negative surprise due to the short time Kurt needed to imbue mana into the items, but suddenly, the buyer reevaluated the crystals and decided she was willing to pay 10 gold just for that crystal, because it contained 10 times more mana than usual, and the shine wasn't strong because the crystal had been treated to prevent mana leakage from inside. Having 50 crystals, the buyer placed a bag with 500 gold on the counter without hesitation, but asked for 2 things from her friend. Firstly, she must not sell these magical crystals anywhere but in this store, as it would not be in the kingdom's interest to have such powerful crystals circulating regularly on the market. Secondly, she asked Ulysses to disclose who performed the mana imbuing process on these items, but Kurt's boss refused to provide employee information without his permission. At this, with a mild show of authority, the shop owner reminded her that she was a court mage with the status of an honorary count, meaning this was an order. However, Ulysses argued that she no longer served the royal family and did not have to obey such an order, so the friend gave up and only asked her to ensure that the responsible party did not leave the country, and to inform him that she was offering him the position of director of a royal magical technology research laboratory, with the title of honorary baron or even honorary count. After leaving the store, Ulysses tried to grasp how she had just acquired 500 gold and how that boy could become a count out of nowhere. Unable to get it out of her head, she returned to the workstation to ask Kershil about Kurt. Interestingly, the clerk also wanted to know a few things about this boy. Initially, she tried to protect the client's privacy, but when Ulysses showed her crest, the girl revealed that Kurt was from the Blazing Dragon Fangs, but had been fired and now had earned 200 gold by fixing a wall alone in the Margraviate of Takon. Speaking of money, the former adventurer asked the employee to deposit 499 gold in Kurt's account and ordered her not to divulge any information about the boy. Hours later, Ulysses returned to where her miner was and discovered that he had built a wooden house on the site in less than a day. She asked him about it, and the boy found it normal, explaining that people usually do this in his hometown. In the next moment, we see the Flaming Dragon Fangs group struggling against a gigantic creature. Golnova asks to be healed after sustaining injuries in battle, but Marlefus simply cannot do it. As he blocks the attacks from the evil tree, the leader asks if the newcomer can't use fire magic, but the boy complains that Golnova himself said he was capable of it. Overhearing the argument from outside, Bandana thinks to herself that this group is finished. Following this, Kurt is shocked to learn that they want him to be the director of the Royal Magic Technology Lab, meaning he'll receive noble treatment. Ulycia explains that the person she asked to evaluate the magic crystals serves as a royal court mage as a hobby. Thus, Kurt acknowledges it's a great offer, but ultimately declines. Internally, he reflects that he can't see himself in a role that places him above others, besides feeling bad for the Flaming Dragon Fangs. Outwardly, he argues to his friend that his main role is to work there, and then asks if the sale of the crystals was enough to cover the taxes. She responds that she sold them for a great price, but it wasn't her who created them. In fact, she took some gold as a handling fee and deposited the rest into Kurt's account. He thinks it wasn't necessary, but Ulycia insists it was, as she would feel too guilty accepting such a large sum. In any case, the woman plans to continue mining and counts on the young man to stand by her in this, and Kurt is immediately enthusiastic, especially since he found what seems to be a promising mineral vein yesterday. However, the boss is concerned about how many hours he rested, and he informs her that he slept 6 hours. To her astonishment, since he built a house by himself and slept so little, Kurt thinks she's upset because he slept too much, given that he used to sleep only 4 hours a day with the Flaming Dragon Fangs. Therefore, he promises to make up for the excessive sleep. After their conversation, Kurt takes the woman to an area he believes is good for mining. Ulycia confesses she doesn't see anything special, so he explains that, considering the mountain's topography, there must be a mineral deposit below, but Ulycia should not dig deeper than 50 meters. She thought they would dig together, so the employee explains that he plans to dig around the area where he found that large crystal yesterday. Hours later, the boss finds a very valuable topaz and screams with joy, assessing that it must be worth about 3 gold coins, especially since Kurt will turn it into a magic crystal for free if she asks, which would help her meet her target. With this in mind, she feels a spark of passion for the miner, but quickly scolds herself to push that feeling away. With a smile plastered on her face, Ulycia follows Kurt Rawkins, imagining that by now he has made an entire mining tunnel. Indeed, the kid had simply built a mine in the meantime. Ulycia enters and notices the excessive brightness, then wonders if they don't need lanterns because of the glowing moss. Either way, she freaks out when she realizes the tunnel is huge in a surreal way, and it was supposed to be impossible for that kid to manage to open such a large one in so little time. At that moment, the aforementioned arrives and laments that all he extracted were useless stones, along with small fragments of the mineral he's looking for. Ulycia takes a look at the useless stones, but acknowledges that they actually look pretty nice. Kurt agrees, but since they are plentiful, those mithril stones don't have much value. Upon hearing this name, the boss is incredulous. After all, mithril is not only more valuable than gold, but it's even more expensive than platinum. Curiously, Kurt mentions that this stuff is so common in the village he came from that people throw it away. Startled, Ulycia asks what mineral he was looking for, and he replies that it's orichalcum. The woman recalls that this is the legendary mineral known as the Metal of the Gods, and she didn't even know it existed in this mountain. Holding a sample, Rawkins mentions that it's possible to extract this thing anywhere, but only if you can dig very deep into the soil. Now unsure what to think, the woman asks if this guy managed to dig that much in 8 hours and then return to the surface, and he responds yes, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. And not only did he open the hole, but he also closed it because it was too dangerous to leave it open. That said, she attentively observes the surroundings and notes that the employee crossed the entire mountain with his tunnel. Finally, 2 days later, Kurt finishes mining and returns to Samela with Ulycia, and the tunnel he opened was capable of connecting this city with the city of Lord Takon. Therefore, Ulycia allows members of the Merchants Guild to use it in exchange for a maintenance fee, and the woman will be able to cover the taxes with this money. At some point, while walking on the street, Kurt is approached by Bandana, who tells him that she is no longer part of the Flaming Dragon Fangs after several things happened. She recalls that one day, Golnova ate at a popular restaurant and left without paying the bill because he thought the food was terrible. When he met Bandana on the street, he wanted to know if they still had the smoked meat Kurt had made, but she remembers that the team leader ate it all. Hearing this, the man points his sword at the subordinate and orders her to bring the kid back, and that it's okay to hurt him a bit if he refuses to cook. Calmly, Bandana assures that she will do what she can and, using her speed, she borrows the teleportation crystal from the boss without asking. After leaving the alley where she found Golnova, she sees guards looking for him because of the trouble at the restaurant, and thinks that Marlefus was lucky to have been called by the church. In the end, she was right. The group ended up going down the drain, and Bandana decides to visit the leader only when she feels like it. Reflecting on this, Bandana decides to put the whole ordeal aside and simply says she was dismissed, as she doesn't want her surveillance target to get tangled in this mess either. Hearing this, Kurt regrets not being able to return to Dragon Fangs right now. After all, he greatly admires Golnova and feels deeply indebted to him. Eventually, Bandana mentions that she knows someone from a workshop who needs assistance. According to her, there are only 15 Eitlier Meisters with official permission in the country, and one of these significant figures is in trouble. It would be helpful if Kurt could lend a hand. Surprised and delighted to be considered useful, the young man eagerly agrees to help, and the woman gives him the address, prompting him to dash off towards the location. Left alone, Bandana thinks that being an apprentice to the Great Sage is no easy task. On his way to the mission, Kurt recalls that the workshops known as Eitliers are facilities that mainly produce and sell medicines, magic swords, magical devices, and similar items. The head of an officially sanctioned Eitlier is known as an Eitlier Meister and is authorized to develop these sites and is treated as a viscount in terms of status. Honestly, the boy had no idea that such a person existed in this city. Soon, he arrives at the address written on the paper Bandana gave him. The house seems quite ordinary, but a sign reads Eitlier Ophelia. When he knocks, a very young girl, surely too young to be considered a master, answers the door. Seeing the human's astonished face, the girl thinks he's acting this way because he's not used to dealing with elves, so the boy explains that it's not the case and asks if she is the master of the Eitlier. She tells him she is just Michelle Lalacata, the boss's assistant. Kurt says he came to help on Miss Bandana's recommendation, and the assistant, thrilled to finally have some help, pulls him inside. Upon reaching the place of contention, Kurt pinches his nose due to the foul smell. It turns out they needed someone to clean the kitchen, and Kurt grimaces bitterly upon realizing he would never be considered useful in assisting directly in the Eitlier. Then, Michelle is called by the boss, leaving the boy alone with the mess. Without hesitation, he pounds his chest, dons an apron, and cleans up the entire mess in 30 minutes. Unsure what to do next, he follows the path Michelle had taken and goes after her, until he knocks on a door where he receives permission to enter. But inside is a girl wearing less clothing than appropriate. Confused, she asks who he is, and Kurt introduces himself in a startle, apologizing for entering under these circumstances. Not minding much, the lady informs him that Lady Ophelia has gone to the basement. At that moment, Kurt notices a curse mark on the girl's belly and asks to take a closer look. With her permission, he touches the mark and sees that she feels no pain, likely because the curse has consumed so much of her that she hardly feels it anymore. At least, her stomach still works because it growls ominously. Therefore, Kurt offers to prepare some light food for her. Arriving in the kitchen, he realizes he was touching the body of a naked woman and blushes, and the distraction causes him to trip over a stool in the middle of the path and fall face down. Meanwhile, Ulyssia is in a meeting with her friend from the court, wanting to know what the value would be. The purple-haired girl offers 50,000 gold for the mithril and orichalcum, which makes the businesswoman sweat from the amount of money mentioned. She questions what Mimiko thinks will happen if they find out Kurt Rawkins exists, and Mimiko bluntly replies that the boy could easily be kidnapped or even killed. Honestly, she has no idea how such a monstrous kid has remained anonymous for so long. Ulyssia mentions that he was fired from the Flaming Dragon Fangs, which reminds Mimiko that the leader of this group is being sought by the authorities. She wants to know what her friend plans to do with the boy from now on, and Ulyssia hopes to place him in the position of Eitlier Meister, as limiting his actions would be better than him standing out. Moreover, she herself wanted to be hired as a guard, but has no idea how to make him accept this, as the boy has no clue of his real capabilities. Speaking of the boy, Kurt was calmly preparing the meal until he notices the arrival of Michelle along with a tall woman, and both are impressed with the cleanliness of the kitchen. He asks if she is Lady Ophelia, which she confirms. The boy apologizes for using the kitchen without permission to make this porridge, explaining that there was a girl in the back room who was hungry. Surprised that he had met the girl, the master makes it clear that the boy should not speak of her to anyone, and Kurt promises to keep quiet. Thus, Ophelia pays him a generous sum for today's service and asks him to come back tomorrow at the same time. When Kurt leaves, the master regrets having allowed that girl to have contact with strangers, as she must do everything to prevent the curse from worsening. Then, Ophelia goes to the room of the said girl with the meal and asks her not to open the curtains the way she was doing at that exact moment, as someone might see her. Noticing that the young girl's clothing is too loose, the master kneels to see how she might adjust the pajamas, until she hears the girl's stomach rumble loudly and bursts into laughter. Then, she gets up to check if her food is poisoned, but the young girl thinks it is unnecessary, as if it was that boy who made it. Her intuition says he has a good heart and would do no harm. Besides, she is already a wreck because of the curse, and it would not be necessary for any poison to finish her at this point. Speaking of which, not knowing who cast this curse on her, the girl confesses that she has spent her life suspecting everyone. But today, at least, she would like to trust someone to the end. Having said that, she smells the delightful scent of the porridge and imagines that the cook must have added herbs. With the first spoonful, she falls in love with the flavor and feels her heart warm up. Seeing that everything is okay, Ophelia is relieved and heads to the door, until the little girl begins to feel choked and collapses to the floor. Thinking the food was indeed poisoned, Ophelia starts blaming herself for being careless, while feeling a deep hatred for Kurt Rockens. The mistress rushes to fetch the antidote, but Lies gets up and claims to have been cured for some reason. Indeed, the curse mark had completely disappeared, which leaves Ophelia extremely confused. Without delay, a man in a black robe laments to his boss because the curse was broken and promises to reformulate it. However, his superior tells him that they will not wait for that and have already decided to resort to other means. After all, Lady Lyslot needs to die by any means necessary. In the midst of this, Ophelia visits Mimico given the grave situation and notices the presence of Ulycia, the former adventurer of the royal family. Lady Lyslot removes her hood, and Ulycia and Mimico immediately kneel before the illustrious presence of the third princess. Mimico thought she was ill, but Ophelia explains that the princess was cursed by someone who wanted to take her life, as Lies is the only daughter born between His Royal Majesty and Princess Françoise, the woman he married from the east, from the Gurumaku Empire. Hence, Lyslot's existence is a symbol of peace between these two nations. Ulycia deduces from this that someone wants to destroy this peaceful relationship, and Ophelia adds that, with the end of their nation's war against the northern nation, there are certainly people who would like to provoke another conflict. Mimico gives a joyful hug seeing that the princess is well, and Lies hopes to count on her friends' help to discover who cast the curse on her. About this, Mimico assures her loyalty lies with the princess and her deceased highness, Françoise. Having said that, she is surprised that Lies broke such a powerful curse, and the monarch joyfully shares that it was all thanks to a man named Kurt, which leaves Mimico and Ulycia astonished. In light of the unexpected revelation, it became necessary to explain to the two that the princess had eaten porridge made by Kurt, breaking the powerful curse afflicting her. Regarding the culprit who plotted to take Lady Lyslot's life, considering that it's someone skilled in curses with connections capable of tampering with the palace's curse protections, Mimico has 3 suspects. Sanova Ristkatz, the first general of the Royal Expeditionary Forces, Tristan Maynolf, a bishop of the Poland Church, and Isidora Arkmana, the third queen of His Royal Majesty. Ophelia believes Tristan could have used his followers to tamper with the protections in Lyslot's room. Lies adds that her stepmother, Isidora, can move freely around the royal palace and might very well have interfered with them. On the other hand, she wonders how Sanova could do the same, so Ulycia explains that this general has connections with the Thieves' Guild, which obviously has its ways to enter places they shouldn't, and enough influence to bribe people inside the royal palace. Since it's difficult to pinpoint the culprit at this moment, Ophelia suggests setting a trap to catch this rat. For example, Lies recently turned 15 and became an adult, and tradition dictates that she leave the palace to train for a year. So, the plan is to create a non-existent workshop, run by a fictitious Meister, where Lies will train. Surely, the culprit will start gathering information about the supposed master of this place. Mimiko deduces that if it were someone who really existed, the thieves would collect information quickly. But since he doesn't actually exist, there's nothing to collect, and this bait will confuse the culprit and buy them time to investigate the situation more thoroughly. However, Ophelia says they need to prepare some credentials for this person who will be the fake 8-Leer Meister. But Ulycia has just the thing for that, a magic crystal. Ophelia takes the item and is startled by its quality. Then the mine owner reveals that Kurt made it, leaving the master and the princess dumbfounded again. Later, Kurt arrives at the door of Ophelia's workshop and sees a sign that it's temporarily closed due to some unspecified emergency. At that moment, Michelle arrives, so the boy takes the opportunity to ask what happened. She explains that after Kurt left yesterday, her master suddenly went somewhere, and she's sorry that there's no way for the boy to help in the workshop now. Because of this, the poor guy walks away downcast, thinking he made another blunder that got him kicked out of the place. Anyway, his stomach growls, determining it's time to eat, so he heads to a restaurant to ease his hunger with a smile on his face. There, a group of warriors is discussing something at one of the tables. The woman in the trio questions what they will do, as they need to deliver something today. A man replies that he doesn't know, as the doctor said that such a person needs to rest for a week. But without their carrier, they'll have to refuse this order. The problem is they can't afford the cancellation fee, so the girl thinks it's better if they just carry their things. However, her companion reminds her that they will be very vulnerable to attacks if they are loaded down. Kurt overhears the discussion and thinks he could serve as a carrier for these people. Therefore, he brazenly approaches the team and offers to act as a mule for the group, since, although he's a clod in combat, he has an incredible talent for carrying things on his back. The girl dismisses the idea of a kid like that managing the task, but her colleague slaps her on the head and reminds her that she's the same age as this guy. The man apologizes for his sister's behavior, but admits that this job isn't for just anyone, as they are preparing to hunt iron golems that weigh over 200 kilos, and it will take someone with special abilities to carry the necessary items. The only team member who hadn't spoken until then contributes the following statement. That's right. Regardless, Kurt assures them that 200 kilos is nothing for him, so he proposes a challenge. If he can lift the 2 men of the team, that will prove he's the right guy for the job. Without waiting for any of them to agree, Kurt lifts one of the men over his shoulder as if he were a 10-inch statue, leaving the rest of the people dumbfounded. Then he picks up the blonde, who, with his armor, weighs over 150 kilos. Immediately, the restaurant's clientele applauds the spectacle. Having done that, there could be no other outcome. Kurt Rocken proved he was up to the job, so the team sets off on the mission. The armored guy introduces himself as Cans, a heavy warrior. Although he wields a sword, it's practically ornamental, as his own fists speak louder than any blade. The other man introduces himself as Danzo, the samurai who leads this group. Kurt asks what a samurai is, and Danzo explains that it's an oriental variant of a swordsman. Lastly, the girl introduces herself as Sina, a ranger. Cans extends his hand to the new teammate and informs him that the team is called Sakura. He explains that they have another carrier named Bibinok, but he will take a week to recover from a cold. In response, Kurt bows and thanks them for hiring someone ordinary like him, and the reaction from the people is to burst out laughing, confusing the carrier. Cans lightly knocks Kurt on the head and says he counts on him, and the boy only thinks that he must try not to mess up with these cool guys. Later, they arrive at a cave where the mission is to be carried out, but Kurt steps on a slime in the middle of the path and gets his foot stuck in the goo. Sina says it's just a matter of the kid crushing the creature's core, but the carrier is so incompetent in a fight that he manages to stab his own thigh instead of the slime. Out of patience, the ranger sorts out the situation and acknowledges that her colleague warned he was bad at fighting, but what he just did was a spectacular blunder. Still, Cans and Danzo assure him that there's nothing to worry about, as they are the ones who need to fight. Kurt is shocked because his companions didn't get mad at him for failing, since this was routine in his old group. Finally, the quartet enters the cave, and the ranger prepares glowing moss to spread and light the path with a visual spectacle. Kurt points out something he saw along the way, and the girl explains with disgust that it's goblin dung, and by the smell of it, it's still fresh, meaning the monsters aren't far. Kenz asks everyone to stay calm, as they can surely handle 1 or 2 goblins without difficulty. But if it turns out to be a horde, they can always run like the wind. Deeper into the cave, the dungeon begins to resemble ruins as the team progresses. Kurt notices something strange on the wall, but is interrupted by the arrival of a goblin. In that instant, Sina throws a knife into its chest, and Danzo finishes it off with his katana. The problem is that the voices of several similar monsters can be heard in the distance, clearly indicating that there is a whole colony in this location. To make matters worse, they are coming from the entrance, which means one thing: there is no possibility of escape. The Sakura group must fight. Sina knows they stand no chance, but Kurt goes back to the wall where he suspected something and ends up finding a secret passage. However, upon hearing the suggestion to follow Kurt into the passage, only Sina enters and closes the passage behind her. On the other side of the door, Kan says it's impossible to escape so many goblins while looking for a way out, so the two of them must go ahead. Kurt replies that he wants to stay and fight, but Sina, with tears in her eyes, yells that he can't even defeat a slime, and with that attitude, he'll only hinder Kans and Danzo. Hearing her harsh words, the carrier reflects on how much the girl wanted to be fighting alongside her comrades. On the other side, Kans asks Danzo if he regrets their decision, to which he asserts he does not and returns the question. Kans responds that dying to protect his little sister is the highest honor an older brother could have. The samurai concludes that a death without shame is a warrior's pride, and his friend agrees that there is no regret in fighting for their comrades' survival. Kurt overhears the conversation and is astonished to have been accepted as one of them so quickly, although he laments that he can't do anything to help. Anyway, Sina assures that Danzo and his brother will survive, then lights up the secret passage to continue on. But this brings a terrible consequence. At the end of that passage were iron dragon golems. Meanwhile, Ulyssia and Lyslot arrive at the inn where Kurt is staying, and Ulyssia asks the girl to keep from the boy that she is the princess. She agrees and suggests it would be better to be called Lies to avoid formalities, and the elder agrees to be called Yuli. Excited to see the boy who had so charmed her, the princess bursts into his room, but her smile fades as she notices he is not at home. For some reason, Bandana was outside the door and reveals that the boy is in a cave in the northeast with the Sakura group. Yuli rushes to see who it was, but Bandana had disappeared. She fears this could be a trap, but if Kurt is indeed in this cave, and since combat training was recently completed in that region, there are risks of many surviving goblins having fled there. For this reason, Ulyssia decides to search for her companion, while Lies should stay in the city. However, the princess insists on going along. After all, it's not wise to distance oneself from the person you're protecting. Plus, she has learned to use magic as a member of the royal family and can fend for herself. Since that's the case, the protector agrees, but asks that the protected not leave her side at any moment. Some time later, the two arrive at the location where Kurt Rockins is supposedly located. The fresh glowing moss on the walls indicates that someone had indeed passed by recently, and Lies even finds Kurt's footprints, though Yuli has no idea how this girl knows they are his. Further ahead, Lies struggles to identify traces when they reach the ruins, so she activates her heightened senses ability to more effectively detect any trace of the boy's passage. At that moment, she smells the target's scent and runs in a certain direction. And once again, Ulyssia tries to understand how she remembers the scent of that citizen. As she runs toward the smell, the princess hears sounds of a fight in the distance. Then Yuli tells her to stay there and unsheathes her sword, while Lies grants her ally a physical enhancement before she leaves. In the eye of the storm, Kans and Danzo do what they can amid a torrent of enraged goblins until a third fighter appears to change the course of the battle. Inside the secret passage, Sina can't believe the bad luck they had to come face to face with such a creature, and she begins to regret having accepted this mission, as now all her friends are in danger. Feeling guilty, she apologizes to Kurt for having dragged him there. After all, there's no way they can rid themselves of such a threat. Since these iron dragon golems are meant to protect the passages, they will be attacked as soon as they try to cross. In turn, Kurt consoles the girl and stands up to take care of the golems. in front of the terrified girl, who doesn't understand what the heck got into this madman. Rockins approaches the golems, dodges a blow from one of them, and unscrews its tail as if it were a bolt. Then, he does the same with the monster's head, dismantling it piece by sticking his dagger into specific openings in that armor. Once he does this with all the enemies, Cena would love to know what's going on in this place. So Kurt explains that he's used to mining iron golems. Then, Ulysses reaches the two members who entered the secret passage, and the ranger recounts, with terror in her eyes, that the kid dismantled each golem as if he were playing with Lego, and even called it mining. Seeing that her partner has returned, Kurt asks her to help Cans and Danzo, but she reports that the two are alive. Then, she thinks to herself that she had heard legends about a man with a G-level aptitude in combat who, by chance, had an S-level aptitude in harvesting. According to the legends, this man used a scythe to defeat a thorny dragon, and Yuli associates Kurt's case with that legend. Finally, Lyslot arrives soon after, and her eyes sparkle at the unmatched talent of Master Rockins. After the entire team regrouped, Cans lamented not having discovered the potential goblin infestation that might have occurred in the northeast. Regardless, he and Danzo humbly thanked Lady Ulysses for her assistance. In turn, Yuli told Kurt that a new workshop would soon be established, where she would serve as the direct chief adventurer, and that he should consider joining her there. Kurt argued that he was already working with the Sakuras, but Cans emphasized that the boy couldn't afford to miss such an opportunity. Meanwhile, Yuli mentioned that she needed manpower for the workshop and invited the adventurers to join the project. At this, the two men from Sakura celebrated, but Cena remained morose in her corner. Since he was going to the workshop, Ulysses asked Kurt to take an aptitude test when they returned. With the mission resolved, everyone returned to the city, and Kurt went to the Hallow workstation, where he was greeted by Mimiko. She introduced herself as a mage of the royal court and was responsible for administering Kurt's aptitude test. She remarked that she had seen his magic crystal before, but she needed to meet the creator of that work in person. That evening, the Sakura group celebrated the successful mission and the invitation to the workshop, with the distinguished Lyslot present, although Cena remained downcast for some reason. Turning back to Mimiko, she informed Ulysses that Rockins had the following aptitudes: B rank in cleaning, cooking, and mining, and C rank for everything else. Yuli asked what the actual results were, and the mage explained that the workstation could only measure talents from G to SS ranks, meaning anything beyond its measuring capability was ranked SSS, and that was the case with this boy. Moreover, even his latent magical power was much greater than that of the royal court mage. Yuli had her suspicions, but this was proof that he was the right person to be the secret Atelier Meister. Mimiko stressed how fortunate it was that she conducted the test, because if someone else had, the information could have leaked. With that, Kershaw appeared shocked upon seeing Rockins' results on the table. Mimiko and Yuli pretended they had just discovered this as well, and noted how dangerous it would be if someone outside knew about it. So the employee covered her ears and shouted that she hadn't heard anything. Sometime later, Kurt was amazed at the speed of the carriage he was traveling in. Ulysses explained that the carriage was arranged using the special authority of an Atelier Meister, and Lies added that after all, there were no teleportation stones in the border town they were heading to. As for the town, she remembered it was a military base on the frontier of the Demon Lands, and although a new viceroy had yet to be appointed, it was a very important city that received aid from the Alliance. Danzo proudly added that they would be the personal adventurers for a newly built Atelier in such a significant city. With that said, Cans asked what they would do about Bybinok, and the samurai asked to leave that matter to him. Changing the subject, he wanted to know what this Atelier Meister was like, and seeing Ulysses struggle to explain, Cena concluded that these people hadn't hired their group for their skills, but to keep them quiet. However, if necessary, she would do everything to protect her brother and Danzo. Hours later, the carriage arrived at the wall that Kurt had helped rebuild days ago, which made him feel disheartened. Lies asked why, and he explained that he had worked on repairing the wall but was fired after 3 days. Interestingly, it seemed that not much progress had been made after the boy left the site, and Ulysses supposed that maybe they were fixing it in a different way. Without delay, the woman led her companions to a site that would serve as the base for the Atelier. The group contested that it looked more like an empty lot, so she explained that they would wait at the inn until everything was ready. With that said, she questioned whether Kurt could build the 8-layer on his own, a question that left the Sakura group dumbfounded. Kurt explained that he could manage if it was a log cabin, but building an 8-layer in a day seemed crazy. Kans, Danzo, and Sina agreed that it was the craziest thing they had ever heard. Then Kurt added that he would need 2 more days to complete the work, which again left the Sakura speechless. Yuli explained that the young man could take as long as he wanted, and that he would have the necessary materials for the job. Given that, Kurt made a list of everything he needed and handed it to the woman, with items like amethyst, sapphire, and griffin feathers. After noticing that Sina seemed suspicious about something, Yuli called everyone to go to the inn to not disturb the bricklayer, reminding Kurt that he should return to the inn whenever he needed to eat and rest. Once there, Yulicia asked everyone to sit down so she could say something important. Sina asked if she was going to talk about what happened in the cave. After all, those iron dragon golems were defeated by Kurt alone. He said he was used to mining iron golems and destroyed those monsters with just a dagger. Thinking about it, Sina demanded that Yuli tell them who that guy was, and who Lies really was. First of all, Yuli introduced herself as an adventurer who used to serve the royal family. Then the other girl identified herself as Lyslot Humeros. Showing the crest on her dagger, she revealed she was the 3rd princess of this kingdom, but was concealing her identity for certain reasons at the moment. Therefore, Sina asked if Kurt was also royalty, and Yuli explained that he wasn't, nor was he part of the nobility. In fact, she had no idea who the young man really was. What was known was that his combat skills were all rank G, while those unrelated to fighting were all rank SSS, such as transport and mining, for example. However, not even Kurt knew this, and they made sure to hide it, making him think he was rank C or B, at best. The big question was that Kurt Rockens would be the new 8-layer Meister here, but that also needed to remain a secret. Sina revolted and questioned why they were deceiving the boy this way, and Yulicia explained that even if they told Kurt the truth, he certainly wouldn't believe it. But most importantly, there was no way to know if someone would plan to exploit Kurt's abilities if they made this information public. With that, Sina slammed the table and explained that the ones exploiting the young man were they themselves, so Kans hugged his sister to calm her down a bit. Danzo gave the go-ahead for Yulicia to continue the story. Then Lyslot explained that Kurt Rockens had broken the curse cast on her with homemade porridge. Yuli added that someone was after the princess, so they chose this border town for the construction of the 8-layer, allowing them to identify the enemy behind this pursuit. Still, Sina complained that Kurt knew nothing about this, and Lies shared that the boy had no idea who she was. But as soon as he learned that Lies was under this curse, he saved her without asking for anything in return. According to Yuli, the young man was pure and always put others first, making him someone they wanted to protect, and that's why they asked the Sakura group to keep this secret and join forces to keep Kurt safe. Hearing such a complicated story, the Sakura lowered their heads in a reflective tone and took a few seconds to respond. The first to speak was Danzo, claiming that a knight's duty was to obey royalty. However, as adventurers, they had no such obligation. Nevertheless, they were also comrades who risked dying alongside Rockens, so they were companions. Kans fully agreed and added that they didn't need reasons to help friends. Lastly, Sina was undecided. After all, they had known these women for a very short time to swear their swords to them this way, so Yulicia argued that she herself had only known that boy for just 6 days. Still unconvinced, the ranger asked for a moment to think and withdrew. Walking alone on the street, the girl tried to understand what was happening, because for her, Kurt should know the truth. Soon, she returned to the 8-layer site and saw the work at a much more advanced stage than would be humanly possible. Startled, she questioned if the guy had done all that without help, and he explained that he could do it. After all, he was rank B in mining. Knowing that no rank B would be capable of doing that, Sina let it go and commented that the young man was really incredible, which he didn't understand since in his hometown, it was common to build dozens of houses every day, so he kind of still felt slow, actually. Sina asks the boy if he doesn't mind being burdened with all the work like that. He explains that he doesn't feel put upon. Actually, he's happy to work and feel useful to someone, considering he was called useless by his former teammates every day until they kicked him out of the team. Hearing this, Sina recalls Yulicia mentioning that Kurt was a pure-hearted boy, and she begins to understand his perspective better. With that, the adventurer firmly declares that she and Kurt are officially friends from now on. Meanwhile, Danzo is sitting on a park bench when a carriage stops in front of him. Seated behind him and working as an informant, Bandana claims to have uncovered most of the details. Bibinak, also known as the Man of 1,000 Faces, accepts missions from villains before infiltrating a group of adventurers. Essentially, he's a scoundrel who has ruined many groups, but it seems he accepted this last mission specifically to take down Sakura, as a rival group is resentful that Sakura took a job they wanted. Bibinak was sent because of this, and the details of the situation are on the paper Bandana handed to the samurai. That night, in a tavern in the city of Samala, a man is harassing a waitress in a demeaning manner, and after failing to get anything from her, he grumbles to himself that he hadn't counted on the survival of the Sakura scoundrels. He also heard they were employed at a workshop connected to the third princess. Thus, if he could crush those rats, he would profit immensely. Seated behind him, Danzo comments that it sounds like a very profitable plan, and the man bursts out laughing in vanity, agreeing since there's no shortage of clients willing to tarnish the little princess's achievements. As the man finishes his sentence, he finally realizes he's been talking to none other than Danzo, who asks if Bibinak isn't drinking a bit too much to celebrate his recovery. In the face of the situation, Bibinak dashes out of the tavern, outraged that the samurai discovered his plan. Suddenly, he trips over a cable that was deliberately placed in his path, and then the adventurer appears with his katana, acknowledging that his former companion was always cunning, so it was impossible he didn't know about a goblin colony. Bibinak swears he knew nothing and pleads on the grounds that the two had been teammates to be spared, yet Danzo brandishes his sword and points it at the man's neck, making it clear that the former Sakura bearer must not come near those who are considered true friends of the samurai, otherwise, he will be cut in half without ceremony. Watching the conversation, Bandana reflects that he wished Danzo had finished this target who could become a threat again in the future. Suddenly, two hooded men appear and take Bibinak away. Bandana notes that they seem to be members of the Phantom, the intelligence unit of Mimiko, the third court mage. At that moment, she receives a letter via a crow talking about Marlefist. Bandana feels sorry for them, but as her master made clear she should ignore that woman, she decides to head for Kurt Rockhen's hometown. In the next scene, in some mysterious and dark place, at the back of a tunnel, Marlefist, the priestess of the blazing dragon fangs, lies on a huge magical circle, apparently too weak to stand up. Days later, Kans and Danzo gaze at a marvelous landscape and wonder if it's reality or fantasy, considering that just 3 days ago, it was a vacant lot, and now it seems like a portal to another world. Nearby, Sina notices a papamomo tree in the garden, so they should have delicious fruits only next spring, but for some reason, the tree is already bearing fruit. Meanwhile, Liz runs through the backyard announcing that this will be the love nest between her and Master Kurt. Soon after, seeing that their friends have entered the workshop, Kurt regrets not having had time to prepare a proper welcome, but Yuli assures him that what they've seen was already quite pleasing. Nevertheless, she would like to take a look inside the structure, so the stonemason first shows the entrance. Then, the 2 floors underground. Besides that, he shows that all the water in the mansion is created there. Amazed, Ulysses asks what the devil is that tank-like device, and the boy tells her he transformed the sapphires he requested into magical crystals, using them to create a water-generating engine. He also made quartz magic crystals for lighting. The magical power is stored in the amethyst and should stay lit for a year straight, even if you leave the power on all the time. Next, the boy shows the bedrooms where everyone will sleep. The pillows and blankets are made from the griffin feathers he requested, and Liz celebrates as she smells Master Kurt on one of them, even though Yuli tries to explain that the smell comes from the griffins. Next, Kurt shows the Atelier Meister's room and takes the opportunity to ask when he will arrive. Ulysses makes up that the master is very busy and his arrival has been delayed, then asks where the stonemason's room is. He replies that, since he's responsible for menial tasks, he thought of sleeping in the small resting area next to the kitchen. Seeing that the boy seems willing to sleep in a pigsty because he considers himself useless, everyone tries to convince him to sleep in the room he built for the Atelier Meister until the real owner arrives. 2 hours later, the group finally convinces the boy to stay there for now. Done that, Ulysses asks if he can put a curse barrier around this mansion. However, as the boy confesses that this is a bit difficult, the woman uses the anti-curse talismans that Mimiko gave. Now, for Lyslot's room, which is the most important, she thinks about some special protection. Suddenly, Lys rushes out of her room and scares the poor woman, thinking it was Kurt there and inviting him to her bed. Annoyed, Yuli asks where this girl learned such things, then Lys asks back if her friend is jealous by any chance. Losing all composure, the businesswoman pretends she's not. Although it's obvious, nevertheless, she remembers that Kurt is pure and innocent, so Lys should approach the guy gently. Speaking of which, the talented Rockins is busy preparing a meal for everyone in the kitchen, when Lys walks in wearing a provocative waitress outfit to help with whatever is needed. Yuli steps in to question which part of taking it easy the princess didn't understand, especially while wearing such an indecent outfit. On that note, Kurt admits he also found it a bit odd, but Lys herself had claimed that this attire was common at her home. Moreover, Sina opens the kitchen door after smelling freshly baked bread, only to see Lyslot in that peculiar outfit and frowns. Kurt confirms that there is indeed bread baking in the oven, and that it will be a regular morning occurrence in this house. By the way, when the boy asks whether the women prefer coffee or tea, Ulyssea's eyes light up, and she concludes that this man is the perfect housewife. Therefore, she now intensely desires him as her spouse. At mealtime, Cans is the first to praise the food with great enthusiasm. Sina gives a look that shows she enjoyed it, and Danzo mentions that he can feel the food energizing his entire body. Ulysses asks where Kurt is, and Lys explains that he went out to clean, carrying a cloth, because according to him, someone had scribbled all over the mansion. Knowing that Lys was probably referring to the curse protection, Ulysses rushes to Kurt in a hurry, although Mimiko had mentioned that it's impossible to remove the talismans once they are placed. However, as soon as she reaches Lys's room, the boy was cleaning the last mark on her door. When he asks if she knows who made the mess in the corridor, the woman kneels in sadness and explains that it was definitely the work of Rabisky, the scribbler often mentioned in rumors. He must have seen Lys and left those scribbles in hopes of catching her attention. Believing this story, Kurt remarks that there's a lunatic for everything, but it would be wise to inform Lys about this. Given this, Yuli reflects that she managed not to reveal the assassins after Lys, but now with no talismans, and with it taking a few days for Mimiko to arrive, Yuli needs to find a way to protect the princess until then. In the next moment, we see that Marlefus has been expelled from the church by some religious authority. The reason being, not only had the flaming dragon fangs shown numerous failures and acts of violence towards others, but the leader of the group had become a wanted man. Marlefus argued to Bishop Tristan that it wasn't her fault, as she had indeed used lightning magic inside a restaurant in the royal capital, but it was a punishment for them serving her group food worse than pig slop. Regardless, the bishop was done with excuses, for the bad reputation Marlefus had garnered would become a stain on the Poland church if she continued there. Alone, Marlefus grieved, considering that she had always done more for the institution than anyone else, joining ordinary adventurers and performing miracles for others. However, Tristan made it clear that he recognized the sister's magical prowess, and because of this, if she agreed to do a small job for them, they promised to absolve her sins and make her a priestess. Surprised by the offer, the young woman watched as he showed her wine from the enemy of the Poland Empire, the Gurmaku Empire, and asked her to take a sip. Eager for forgiveness, Marlefus drank a gulp of the beverage and allowed the superior to request anything. Thus, Tristan took the opportunity to order her to be part of the execution plan for the third Princess Lyslot. Instantly, a curse mark appeared on the woman's belly, dropping her to her knees. With that, Tristan finally revealed that the wine she had drunk was poisoned with a curse, which would cause Marlefus's body to accept nothing but water. In a month, she would die of starvation. Now, if she passed this test, she would be freed from suffering and become a priestess. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Marlefus offered her life to the bishop, and it was this curse that placed her in such a horrible predicament, even bringing her before a demon lord at the peak of her suffering. Back to the present, during breakfast, Yuli reflects that there has been no change in Lys's body after Kurt erased the protections, and perhaps the enemies haven't yet discovered the princess's location, unless there's another reason they haven't been able to do anything so far, like Kurt's cooking having nullified the curses unknowingly. In any case, Mimiko has already arrived in town and spread her webs. If the enemy tries anything, they'll know immediately. Thinking this over, Ulysses bites into a cake and marvels at the flavor. Moreover, Lise comments to Kurt that the texture of the sweet seems different than usual, and he reveals that today he tried making the cake with rice flour. Lise gets excited about the boy's recipes whenever he uses rice, like the porridge he made, and if she's cursed again, she'd want another serving of that dish. Kurt is pleased by the compliment, but clarifies that the girl no longer needs to worry about being cursed. Amazed, Yuli questions how that could be possible, since the boy himself had said it would be difficult to create a barrier against curses. Indeed, Kurt shares that he can't create such barriers, but he has a trick up his sleeve. In the next scene, we go to another religious figure who asserts that they cannot afford to fail. A sinister figure in front of him agrees and promises that he will curse the third princess to death. As he makes a display of his power, Mimico's web is activated and alerts Ophelia. Then, Kurt tells us that the entire mansion they live in serves as a barrier that reflects curses, so he can't create another barrier inside it, but he has tweaked this a bit. Soon, a Poland church henchman appears with a bright glow inside him, after his curse has disappeared. Kurt explains that instead of the curse attacking the person, the caster simply shines because if he set it to counterattack, the boy would feel bad for anyone accidentally cursed. Immediately, Yuli decides to share this with Mimico and the others, then announces that she needs to step out. Soon after, Kurt invites Lise to go shopping in town together, since the girl hasn't left the studio since they arrived. After all, despite being in a fortress city, the local market has very fresh vegetables. Despite this, Lise declines the invitation, although she can't quite explain why. Meanwhile, from atop the city wall, a man alerts General Allraid that the fog is getting thicker. Allraid confesses to Generic that he has a bad feeling about this, but the subordinate doesn't understand, since the wall was repaired and it's hard for them to be attacked by monsters. Moreover, he still can't believe that the general himself took charge of this repair work. The superior responds that he had no choice, given the importance of the city, for there was fear of enemy spies entering unnoticed. Returning to Ophelia, Mimico finds the man who tried to curse Lise, and he was dead. Probably, those responsible thought they would be discovered by the light, so they took care of this guy. Ulysses questions about this intense glow even after the person's death, and Ophelia explains that Kurt Rockhands created a powerful curse reflector to that extent, and that if he decided to cooperate fully with them, he could solve this problem in the blink of an eye. On the other hand, Ulysses doesn't want to get the kid into even bigger trouble, so Mimico announces that she will investigate the rest later. Then, she asks Yuli to make sure Lady Lyslot doesn't leave the studio, with the mage leaving Phantom to protect the place. Suddenly, the women hear the loud tolling of a bell. From atop the wall, the general is alerted about a monster attack, then activates the magical team to light up the front of the castle. Once done, it was possible to see an army of skeletons approaching the walls, all armed with swords. At the same time, Mimico receives an alert from an informant that the city is being invaded by skeleton women. General Allraid summons the first platoon to defend the territory by his side to the end and orders Generic to finish evacuating the people. But the subordinate asks to fight as well, since the skeletons only manage to go straight, meaning if the defense concentrates soldiers there, they could exterminate the invaders. Yet, Allraid questions what they would do if there were another type of enemy below, and once again sends the subordinate to evacuate the citizens. However, before Generic could leave, something surreal just happened. The skeletons, which had blindly marched forward, instead of stopping at the wall, began to cross the barrier magically. In the meantime, Mimico received another message from an informant. It seems the skeleton horde was being drawn toward the west wall. Upon hearing this, Yuli recalled Kershal mentioning that Kurt had single-handedly repaired the north and west walls. Generic asked what on earth had happened to that wall, and Allraid tried to figure out if that kid had tampered with the wall in some way. Back with Marlefus, the demon requested that she not die just yet. Impatient, he revealed that the first wave had failed, but for the second and third, he planned to use the woman's magical power to summon the monsters. Marlefus struggled to understand how a bishop of the church could have forged a pact with a high-ranking demon to kill a princess. The demon began to conjure skeletons using the woman's mana, explaining that the Lapita ruins had once been used to summon demons, but they were also an ideal area for monster production. It seemed Marlefus didn't have as much magical energy as that bishop had claimed, but using her soul as fuel should be enough to make up the difference. At that moment, Marlefus realized she wasn't partaking in any test. She had simply been deceived by the church. In the morning, Ulicia warned Kurt that the city was surrounded on all sides, and they couldn't call for reinforcements because flying monsters prevented it. Lies expressed concern for the secure group, as they had not yet returned from troll hunting. Yuli reflected that, according to information from Phantom, the monsters were coming from the Lapeter ruins to the west. The knights were devising a strategy, but had to be cautious due to the number of enemies. Lies had heard there was a skeleton attack the night before, so Yuli confirmed it, but said that as soon as they touched the wall, it was as if they were being purified, which even scared the wall's defenders. Surprised, Kurt recalled that being purified upon touching the walls was common in his village. Realizing it was that guy who had rigged this, Yuli feared the skeletons might attack a wall lacking the purifying effect, so she devised a plan to prevent that. She announced she would go to clean up the ruins to the west, but asked the two to stay put no matter what. Kurt was eager to help with the cleanup too, but the warrior explained it was dangerous with so many creatures outside the wall, and the boy understood, being a novice in combat. Eventually, Ulicia accessed a storage where a box contained several glowing stones. At the wall, the defenders struggled to attack enemies to the east and south. A squadron was made available to the general, who noted that the skeletons moved slower during the day. Now was the time to act. Ulicia arrived alongside Ophelia and Mimico, and Allraid was surprised to see Yuli after so long. He heard she had joined the newly opened Atelier in town, and asked who the other two were. The warrior introduced the royal court mage and the Atelier Meister, then revealed that the third princess was also in the city. Thus, the general knew he needed to divert soldiers to protect the aristocrat. But Mimico assured him that little Allrad needn't worry, as her intelligence squadron was taking care of her royal highness. Ulicia shared that she had a plan where the general and his men would serve as bait to draw the monster's attention. During this time, she would personally go to the west ruins to destroy the source of the enemies, armed with a secret weapon that could change the tide of battle. Allraid saw the women displaying a common-looking magical crystal, but Ophelia assured him it could elevate the item to a new level. Thus, the general accepted the plan, but on one condition: he wanted to join the attack on the ruin. Everyone was stunned to see the general putting himself in danger, and he said his deputy general Generic could lead the bait squadron to divert the invaders, while he and Ulicia would attack the main camp of the opponent. Generic warned that this would be too dangerous, yet Allraid argued that serving as bait was just as risky, and he saw no one better than Generic to lead such a complicated mission. Finally, the superior asked for Ophelia and Mimico's help to protect the city and announced the start of the operation. Even though Generic was displeased, Allraid made it clear he wouldn't change his decision. Grumbling that the boss was always like this, the deputy prepared a drink for the two, as it was tradition among them to share a cup and then break the utensil as a way of saying farewell. But this time, the man threw the drink away, ensuring it wasn't a goodbye, but rather a see you soon, as they both would survive and return to pour the general's favorite brandy into these cups. At the Atelier, Kurt sighed while sweeping the yard. Then, he entered the mansion and pondered that the old man in his hometown always said that putting your heart into wrought iron gives you a chance to reflect on yourself. Thinking about this, the boy concluded that Lord Danzo's blade had an incredible edge, and while working a material in the forge, he wondered if he could make a smaller version of that weapon to aid in the war. Indeed, Rockhans felt lost with everything he had experienced, as after being fired, he had been accepted by another group but had proven useless in combat once again, and now his friends were in danger again. Speaking of which, the next wave of skeletons reached the city gate. Beside General Allraid, Ulicia took the magical crystal and asked everyone to cover their eyes when she threw the item. Having said that, the woman hurled the stone at a monster's forehead. Then an explosion of light engulfed the outside of the wall and simply made every creature threatening to invade disappear. Allraid was astounded by the secret weapon from the Atelier, while Mimico emphasized atop the wall that this magical crystal could purify demons and undead in an instant. With the enemies destroyed, the gate was opened, and Generic summoned his battalion to begin the plan, while Allraid and Ulicia headed for the ruins. As Kurt Rockhans progresses in forging a short sword, doubts creep into his mind, and he questions his own talent. Although he's been told that his blacksmithing skill is ranked B, This weapon seems more like a D-level effort. Lady Lyslot opens the door and announces that the rice is ready, then asks if it was Kurt who made the sword. He confirms but admits he got lost in thought and accidentally imbued it with mana. When the girl asks to hold the blade, Kurt explains that if you hold it unsheathed above your head, it will activate a spell. Lys is quite taken with the weapon, prompting the blacksmith to gift it to her, which brings a smile to the girl's face. However, Kurt senses that her smile is forced, and he begins to wonder if he can continue to ignore Lyslot's true feelings. Regardless, the boy gathers his courage and asks if someone is out to kill the princess, and she lowers her head in sorrow that Kurt has figured it out. In that moment, Rawkins confirms his suspicion. Lady Lyslot is afraid. Lys admits feeling guilty that Kurt and Yuli are facing so many troubles. Although Kurt insists that it's not true, the princess can't help but worry about Ulyssia, who is currently risking her life to reach the western ruins. Kurt wonders if that is where the person wanting to kill Lys is located, and she believes it might be. The boy recalls that Ulyssia was supposed to clean up that area, which reminds him of something that happened when he was still part of his old group. One day, Kurt tried to persuade the former leader not to scribble in the ruins, but the man was determined to leave a message. The great Gulnova was here. Eventually, Marlefus shocked the guy to make him stop the foolishness. With this in mind, Rawkins concludes that ruins are perfect for those who enjoy scribbling things, and the culprit behind this must be the notorious scribbler Rabiski, meaning Ulyssia set out to defeat Rabiski. Realizing this, the poor boy laments his inability to fight to protect someone precious to him. When Lyslot hears that she is precious to the boy she likes, she nearly has a heart attack, so Kurt quickly adds that Yuli and his friends from Sakura are also very dear to him, which somewhat dampens the girl's excitement. Setting that aside, both are frustrated by their inability to fight, and unable to bear this feeling of helplessness any longer. Kurt proposes that they head to the western ruin. Lys remembers that monsters are surrounding the city from 8 directions, so Kurt suggests they find a 9th. Speaking of the ruin, Ulyssia and Allraid find themselves surrounded by a horde of skeletons, with the woman feeling that something bad is about to happen. So, Lys adjusts her hat like she's about to take a stroll through the park. She remembers what Kurt said about the blade he gave her, that the weapon activates a spell if you hold it unsheathed above your head. Lys does exactly what she was told, but nothing happens. Then, someone enters her room, catching her completely off guard. Back on the battlefield, Ulyssia and Allraid are almost at the ruins, but a massive wave of enemies still surrounds them. Yuli figures that, at the very least, most of the monsters were drawn away by Generic's decoy squad. Still, she's seen a bright flash on the horizon more than once now, which makes her think they're probably running out of magic crystals, just like she and Allraid are. In the middle of it all, the general takes what looks like a serious hit. Ulyssia rushes to help, but a swarm of winged creatures swoops in, making everything even worse. Right then, Sakura finally arrives. Cans jumps into action with an attack that wipes out a good chunk of the flying monsters. Allraid asks who these men are, and Danzo explains they're adventurers hired by the workshop. Finally, Sina points out that the monsters are coming from the structure just ahead, and since the upper part is destroyed, they're definitely coming from the back or underground. Hearing that, Ulyssia tells the others to shut their eyes, then slams a magic crystal into the ground to wipe out the enemies. After that, Sakura's team can't help but be blown away by the magical tech these people are using. It just keeps getting crazier. Sina had promised herself she wouldn't be shocked by this stuff anymore, but yeah, that promise didn't last. Speaking of surprises, Ulyssia hands General Allraid a basic soup with medicinal herbs. The guy flips out, insisting that no simple soup is going to heal his wound. But everyone around him tells him to chill, they're all in the same boat. Suddenly, several zombies come crawling out from inside the building, and Cans and Danzo step forward, charging straight at them. Sina heads in right behind, and then Yuli and Allraid follow after the rest. They enter the structure, trying to figure out where these things are coming from, fighting off any enemies that appear along the way. Somewhere deep in those ruins, Marlefus realizes she's going to die if this demon keeps draining her energy like this. Through a magical projection, the demon watches Generic's squad advancing into its territory, and Marlefus notices they're using magic crystals. When the entity spots Yuli and Allraid, it recognizes that these two actually know what they're doing, which is good, at least, to cure its boredom. In fact, it decides to greet the guests in person. The two humans push forward through the mysterious halls until more creatures emerge from underground. That's when they discover the source. Without wasting a second, they throw a magic crystal to the floor, wiping out the monsters, then continue on toward a staircase that leads below the first floor. But right then, the demon lord appears. Alraid asks if this thing is the one summoning the monsters, and Ulysses confirms, yeah, that's the boss they need to take down. Fully confident, she charges toward the main enemy, sword in hand. When she's close enough, she throws a magic crystal at the perfect distance to maximize the effect. But it does absolutely nothing. The monster doesn't even flinch. In fact, it mocks the tremendous power the human just showed, which might have been dangerous if it didn't have infinite life. Alraid follows up with a powerful sword strike, landing a solid hit. But the demon doesn't even bother dodging, his body regenerates completely the moment he's struck. The demon lord lets out a sinister laugh as he watches the panic spread across the humans' faces. Meanwhile, Marlefis is still being drained non-stop to produce more minions for the dark entity. She's starting to struggle to breathe, and it's clear she doesn't have much time left. All she can think about is breaking the magic circle she's trapped in. If she could just destroy that, it would shut the whole thing down. But she's so exhausted, she can barely move. The demon tells them he's been watching their battle from the beginning and admits they've done well. But then he shows them, through magical projection, how Generic's squad is struggling. Alraid immediately sees things aren't going great on their end. The demon taunts them, saying everyone is desperately playing hero to protect the city and the princess. But Alraid stands firm, they're the border knights, and they will never bow to a demon. That only convinces the demon that he hasn't summoned nearly enough monsters to break their spirits, so he does just that, conjuring even stronger units. If the knights call in reinforcements now, the demon's giants will destroy the weakest gate, along with the 3 members of Sakura still guarding the ruins entrance. Enraged by the threat, Alraid and Ulysses lash out together, slicing off the demon's head and stabbing through his chest. But as always, he lets out his trademark laugh, calmly picks his head off the floor, and places it right back onto his body. Then, with a sneer, he promises to wipe out the entire Knight Order and drag the princess out of the city, making sure these two are forced to watch her being torn apart before their eyes. Ulysses is visibly shaken by the idea, but Alraid urges her to stay focused. Defeating this thing is the only way to end the conflict. She knows he's right, but she has no idea how. After all, they already decapitated him and pierced his heart, and even Kurt's magic crystals couldn't touch him. The demon bursts out laughing again, feeding on the fear in her eyes, and dares her to just give up and fall completely into despair. Down below, Marlefis seems ready to give in. She tells herself it's all over. She can't break the magic circle, and her hunger is at its limit. If she could at least eat something, maybe some of Kurt's cooking, maybe things wouldn't feel quite so hopeless. Suddenly, she hears Kurt's voice. At first, she thinks she's hallucinating, but it really sounds like the boy is nearby, talking to someone, trying to figure out where they should dig. However, a hole suddenly opened in the ground after the boy successfully dug through the 9th direction he'd mentioned earlier as a possible way out. He jumped in surprise when he saw Marlefis in that state, and the woman, in turn, was stunned to find none other than the 3rd Princess Lyslot standing there. The sight made her instantly assume that Kurt had already figured out her involvement in the princess's execution plot, and that he had brought Lyslot here to make her abandon it. Lys asked if Kurt knew this woman, and he explained that she used to be part of a group he was deeply grateful to. Marlefis corrected him, ex-member. She emphasized, saying she'd been expelled from the Church of Poland by Bishop Tristan. That's when Kurt realized he had no idea she was involved in the hunt for the princess. On the contrary, he figured she'd just gone around scribbling nonsense out of anger from being cast out of the church, like good old Rabiski always did. Even if his reasons were misguided, Lyslot couldn't help but feel moved by the boy's concern for her well-being, while the ex-priestess was growing more and more confused about what the hell was happening. When Kurt asked where Ulysses was, Marlefis guessed he meant the adventurer she'd seen in the Demon Lord's magic projection, and said they were on the floor above. Without missing a beat, Kurt said he'd go after his friend, but Lys stopped him and insisted she go instead. She told him to stay behind and erase the scribbles under Marlefis, since the sword she received would be enough to keep her safe. And just like that, despite her argument being not particularly convincing, Lyslot managed to persuade the guy to let her venture alone into that dark dungeon, even though she was the main target of this entire war. Kurt still had no clue what was really going on. As far as he was concerned, he'd only come here to do some cleaning after all. Yuli had said the mission was just to tidy things up. Marlefus, despite being on the brink of death, was sure she was still better off than that princess. Either way, Kurt Rocken got ready to perform one of his specialties, cleaning. The woman couldn't believe what kind of fool thought he could wipe away a magic circle with a mop, but then watched in disbelief as he did exactly that, as if the runes were just layers of grime on a floor. One level above, after a few attempts, Yuli and Allraid noticed the demon dodged one of their attacks, leading them to suspect that, for some reason, he wasn't regenerating anymore. Ulycia pulled out a magic crystal to see what would happen, but the monster knocked it to the ground before she could use it. From that moment on, he knew playtime was over. Right in the middle of it all, Princess Lyslot appeared, popping into the scene and casually greeting Ulycia like they'd planned to meet at the mall. Not wasting even a second, the demon launched a magical projectile straight into the girl's chest. Yuli didn't have time to react. As she collapsed, the demon burst out in his loudest, most triumphant laugh, yet his pact was finally complete. But then, Lyslot's body vanished, transforming into glowing pink butterflies. In her place, the real princess reappeared behind the group. The demon's expression soured. He'd been fooled by a simple illusion. And yet, the copies sent heat. Everything had felt exactly like the real girl. Lys explained it was all thanks to her sword of confusion, forged in her Atelier Meister and named Butterfly. The demon tried attacking again, but once more, it was just a decoy that instantly dissolved. Another Lyslot appeared, this time near the crystal Ulycia had dropped, and shattered it, bringing an end to the demon lord once and for all. Down below, hearing the demon's final scream, Marlefus figured it was over, and with him, all his summoned monsters. Indeed, wherever humans had been fighting on every front around the ruins, the creatures conjured by the Dark Lord vanished without a trace. Upon seeing this, Ophelia sent a telepathic message to Mimico, mission accomplished. Despite the princess's key role in the victory, Yuli gave her a scolding for leaving the Atelier. Lys admitted she just couldn't sit still and do nothing while everyone risked their lives for her. That said, Ulycia paused for a moment, then realized it was because of that girl they'd all made it out alive. Likewise, General Allraid bowed before Her Highness, declaring that none of them would have survived without her help. The princess, in turn, asked them not to be so modest. Their wounds spoke volumes about the intensity of this battle. It was she who owed them gratitude for protecting the city and its princess. As a token of appreciation, she promised to reward her allies. Naturally, Allraid didn't turn down the offer of a good drink to share with his troops. After all was said and done, Marlefus's stomach growled even louder now that she'd been saved. Though the magic circle had vanished, the curse still lingered, and she was convinced she'd starve to death. Kurt gave her some food, and even though she feared she'd throw it up from the curse, she didn't reject the boy's last rice ball. The taste was heavenly. For a brief moment, the former priestess thought she had died and gone to paradise. To her surprise, she didn't feel sick at all. In fact, the food had purified her curse. It was then she realized Flaming Fang Dragon got as far as they did thanks to this boy's extraordinary cooking. She broke down, finally recognizing his worth, and apologized through tears. Kurt, of course, assumed she was just sorry for scribbling all over the building. Just then, Ulycia arrived with Lyslot, as did the Phantons, who were ready to arrest the notorious scribbler behind all the chaos. Marlefus. Kurt promised to bring her favorite raisin bread to jail and hoped she'd reflect on her crimes. The woman, who had foolishly thought the boy would defend her, now hated him all over again as she was dragged away. Watching Kurt and Lys chat so innocently about how they were doing, Ulycia, the head adventurer, could hardly believe these two were the ones who saved her. In the end, she took Kurt's arm, just like Lyslot did, so the three of them could head home together. And for the first time, Kurt felt a joy he hadn't known before, the joy of having people to return home with a place he could truly call his own. Back in the city, the warriors are treated to a glorious feast in celebration of their victory. Kurt, watching them eat with wide eyes, can't help but think they're being forced to eat. Everyone's devouring their food like it's a matter of survival. with his innocent, slightly offbeat way of thinking. He wonders if he should have prepared something different. But Allraid quickly sets him straight. They're not suffering, they just can't stop eating because it's that good. Speaking of the general, Liz finally introduces Kurt to her loyal officer, Allraid Kukuso. The boy is stunned. All this time, he thought the guy was just the foreman from that wall construction project he helped with. Allraid asks what Kurt thought of the city, and the kid lights up, saying he loved how kind everyone was and the vegetables were absolutely delicious. He figures that has a lot to do with Allraid's good leadership. But before the general can get too flattered, Generic chimes in to spill the truth. Allraid's actually terrible at running things. Allraid responds with a sharp elbow to the vice's gut, then sheepishly admits that Margrave Takon helps cover for his shortcomings. Just then, fireworks burst into the sky, dazzling the crowd of warriors. Kurt proudly says he made them himself, hoping everyone would enjoy the show. As they admire the lights, both Allraid and Generic realize something strange: their wounds have completely healed. Kurt shrugs, saying that's normal when you eat well. The officers exchange a look and tell him that's definitely not normal, but Kurt seems clueless about where they're going with that. Meanwhile, in a far-off chamber, bound by massive chains and a glowing magic circle, a girl watches as Margrave Takon approaches. She greets him calmly, calling him by name. Then, we see a young Kurt running joyfully through the dirt roads of a beautiful and comforting place. He runs up to the daughter of a traveling merchant. The girl didn't care one bit about his presence, but Kurt kept trying to strike up a conversation anyway, praising her horns or commenting on the weather like a rideshare driver. Still, when nothing he said got her attention, the boy was nearly in tears. That's when Mimiko revealed that her father had told her not to talk to people from Haste Village, saying they were kind of weird. But she eventually introduced herself as Hildegard, and whether she liked it or not, the two ended up becoming friends that pleasant afternoon. Carried together by a golem, Kurt excitedly announced they were almost at the spot where rainbow-colored flowers grew, and the girl could hardly wait. When they finally arrived, Hildegard was instantly drawn to some fruit near the edge of the forest. She couldn't resist, she had to taste them. But the moment she did, her body reacted, and she collapsed on the spot. That's when Kurt realized she had eaten the poisonous purple berries. He sprinted into action to make a panacea and antidote, gathering some rainbow flowers and mixing them with other ingredients. Kurt prepared the medicine, placed a bit in his mouth, and leaned in to pass it to Hildegard. And just as he did, Ulycia woke him from the dream. Still dazed, Kurt remembered that this had really happened 10 years ago. As the carriage rolled forward, Yuli mentioned they were nearly at the village that had called for help. Once they arrived, a villager informed her of the severe water shortage the people were facing. At this rate, the crops would wither away in no time. Looking over the regional map, she noticed a large water reserve in a nearby village, along with streams that connected the two. But the man explained that they'd already tried negotiating with the neighbors many times, with no success. That's why they ended up asking the Eitlier's representatives for help. After the meeting, Ulycia returned to the group, but only Danzo was around. He explained that the others had gone up the hill to help out the elderly man who took care of the birds his back was giving him trouble, and they offered to help while Yuli was in discussion. So, she mounted her horse and announced she was heading to the neighboring village to negotiate directly for the water. However, once she got there, the reality was far from what she expected. An older woman living there was just as desperate. Their water supply was also nearly gone. And to make matters worse, two men came running to inform the village chief that something serious was happening on the hill. When she got there, Ulycia was stunned to see both cans and Sina, and a lake. After all, the whole issue had been a water shortage, yet here was a full body of water just sitting there, ready to be used. The two adventurers were also speechless. This lake hadn't been here a short while ago. Suddenly, Kurt came running up, waving at Ulycia, and in that moment, she pieced it all together. From what she'd heard, he was supposed to be helping with the birds. He explained that the waterfowl looked thirsty, so he tapped into a nearby spring. In the middle of all this, the village chiefs arrived and knelt before what could only be described as a miracle, one that had, quite literally, saved their lives. Overcome with emotion, they tried to understand what had happened. Ulycia, a bit embarrassed, attempted to explain, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. Meanwhile, Kurt was amazed to learn that somehow, his friend had managed to solve the entire crisis just like that. On the way home, the 8-Lear expedition team carried a basket filled with various eggs gifts from the grateful villagers. Kurt couldn't stop thinking about the omelet he was going to make for dinner. He asked if Lies was still out, and Yuli replied that she'd gone to deliver a report on the monster attack from the other day. She'd gone to speak with Lord Takone. Speaking of which, Margrave Takone offered the third princess a taste of a special drink and asked her opinion. She said she liked it. Then, he offered the same drink to General Allraid, who thanked him for the honor of being seated at such a fine table, despite being just a rough old soldier. The Margrave said he was honored by the princess's personal visit, though she clarified that she wasn't there as royalty, but as a representative of 8-Lear Meister. Even so, in her thoughts, she noted that the Margrave held authority equal to that of a duke, though in practice, he relied heavily on others for public funding. He had connections to both the royal family and the Gurmaku Empire, and clearly, he was trying to win over Lies to tighten his grip on power, a classic, cunning snake. The Margrave said he'd heard stories about Lies's group using magic stones capable of wiping out monsters across a 500-mile radius. Lyslot instantly recognized that he was fishing for information about the 8-Lear Meister and chose her words carefully. She firmly stated that it was nothing more than a rumor. Seeing he wouldn't get anything out of her, the noble changed the subject, noting that the city still didn't have a name. Lies knew it was customary for the newly appointed viceroy to name a city, which explained why this one remained nameless. At that point, the two furrowed their brows as if locked in a verbal duel. The Margrave admitted he was having a hard time choosing a viceroy, since the frontier city lay closest to the demon lands within his territory, a dangerous post. That's why he was considering appointing the so-called 8-Lear Meister Lies kept mentioning. But Lyslot saw right through the move. It was just a ploy to unmask the Meister's identity. She replied that she couldn't make such a major decision on her own. The Margrave found that odd, since she'd introduced herself as the 8-Lear Meister's representative and should, in theory, have the authority to act. Caught off guard, Lyslot realized she'd slipped up. The Margrave pressed on, pointing out that the Meister had saved countless knights during the last battle, and that no one would object to appointing him as viceroy. Lies regretted not foreseeing this. If only she had talked to Allraid about Kurt sooner. Now, all she could do was silently pray the general wouldn't let anything slip. And with that, Allraid slammed the table and vowed his men would gladly accept the 8-Lear Meister as the new viceroy, sending Lies into a spiral. The Margrave noticed her unease and asked if she doubted this Meister's ability to take on such a crucial role. Just the suggestion that Kurt might not be good enough irritated her so much that she snapped back like a teenage fangirl defending her favorite idol. Realizing she'd crossed the line, Lies clamped her mouth shut, but it was too late. Margrave Takone had won that verbal battle, and just like that, announced the new viceroy had been chosen. Still reeling from the blunder, Lies ran to tell Ulycia. The adventurer suggested they place someone from Sakura as a stand-in 8-Lear Meister to protect Kurt Rockins. But Lies shook her head. None of them had the required expertise, and every knight already knew who they were. In the end, the princess firmly stated that no one could ever replace her beloved Master Kurt, the greatest knight to have ever lived. Speaking of which, Yuli shared that her beloved was fully focused on raising his child now. That bombshell sent Lies into full-blown panic, demanding to know who the mother was and whether she could adopt the baby. Yuli raised an eyebrow. That was a bit much. But Lies insisted she could pretty much get anything she wanted after all. She was the third princess. At that point, Ulycia sighed and revealed it was all a joke. One of the aquatic bird eggs was about to hatch, and Rockins was getting ready to raise the chick. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Mimiko groaned that she was basically on the verge of death. Ophelia added that the girl already looked dead. Her facial mask had dried out and gone stiff. Mimiko complained that these complicated reports just kept piling up. Then Ophelia casually mentioned she'd heard that Bishop Tristan had been found dead inside the Poland Church's cathedral. Mimiko figured he'd been murdered to pay for summoning that demon lord after selling his soul. On that note, she asked Ophelia if she was the one who killed Marlefus. Ophelia said no. Kurt still wanted to see his old companion. Switching topics, the two sighed over the fact that Kurt was going to be appointed viceroy of a border city. And as if that wasn't enough, the royal court mage had just learned that one of the eggs Kurt received was about to hatch. At that very moment, Kurt Kurt stood before his companions and introduced them to his newest daughter, a little girl who looked exactly like him, down to the hair and eye color. After the initial shock, Ulysses tried to make sense of how in the world a 3-year-old could have come out of a bird egg. Kurt, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed in the slightest. And then the child called him Daddy, which only made things more confusing. Since humans don't hatch from eggs, Ulysses tried to make him see reason. This so-called daughter was probably some kind of monster mimicking his appearance to lower his guard and win his affection. In other words, she could kill them all at any moment. So, she told Rockens he had to give her up. He asked what would happen to the little girl if he did. Yuli hesitated, then admitted that she'd have no choice but to kill her. Taking the girl from his arms, she prepared to do just that, but Kurt begged her to let him care for her. He was certain, a creature that innocent couldn't possibly be capable of harming anyone. Ulysses fought the urge to sympathize. She had to protect Lies and Kurt, no matter what. But then, the little girl gently held Ulysses' face and called her Mommy. In that instant, Yuli pictured herself marrying Kurt, raising that child like she were truly her daughter. Lyslot immediately cut in, insisting the girl wasn't Ulysses' daughter, then snatched her from Yuli's arms. But the child called her Mommy too. Stunned, the princess accidentally dropped her, and Sina lunged forward just in time to catch her. This time, the little one called the scout Big Sis. Chaos erupted. Ulysses and Lies were now battling it out to prove who the real mother of the monster was. Kenz had to step in, promising that Sakura would take care of the baby. The rest of the group backed her up. Sina handed the child back to Kurt, and now, the only approval left was from the chief adventurer herself. All eyes turned to Ulysses. She froze, unsure of what to say, but finally admitted she couldn't bring herself to say no. With everyone on board, the group tried to come up with a name. Since she was convinced the girl was her daughter, Lies suggested Curuli. Ulysses was not impressed by the princess's boldness. Kenz reminded everyone the girl had also called Yuli Mom, so Ulysses proposed Ukulai, which had Lies' name buried in it. Lies argued her part of the name felt way too small and countered with Kuliu, flipping the focus to her instead of Ulysses. Naturally, this turned into a full-blown ego match between the two. But as soon as the girl saw her moms fighting, she got sad and asked for a hug. Immediately, both women ran to comfort her, setting their argument aside long enough to apologize to each other. Watching this unfold, Kurt noted that the baby seemed to be calming everyone down, or at least playing them all perfectly. At last, he suggested naming her Akiri, a word that meant edge in the language of the Laplace civilization, but also meant area. In his mind, Akiri represented the connection between all the adults around her, a linking point. Both mothers agreed, and just like that, the girl was officially named Akiri. She seemed to like it, too. Later that night, for someone who wanted to kill the girl just hours earlier, Ulysses looked surprisingly comfortable sleeping with her in her arms. Still, she was only waiting. A special agent arrived quietly, handing her an envelope containing Akiri's hair and saliva. It was to be delivered to Mimiko to find out just what kind of creature this little monster really was. The next day, Kurt had already built a beautiful room for his daughter. It was filled with large, complex toys, but it had no windows, and mithril plates lined the walls, as Ulysses pointed out. In short, it was both Akiri's paradise and her prison. Ulysses regretted asking the boy to build a room like that, but until they heard back from Mimiko, they couldn't afford to take any risks. Lies, for example, was strictly forbidden from contacting the child. It was a precaution to protect the princess until her true origins could be confirmed. In the meantime, Sina would be one of the ones helping to care for the little girl, as the Sakura had offered to do. Akiri called out to Kurt and Yuli, asking them to play. But her father gently explained they had to work now, and that she needed to listen to Big Sis Sina until they were back together again. As the two set off by carriage, Ulysses just wanted to get the job done quickly so they could return to Akiri. Rockens was glad to hear it. That was exactly what he'd been thinking too. Suddenly, they heard the child's voice loud and clear from inside the carriage. They stopped immediately, only to find Akiri sitting there without a hint of shame. She jumped straight into Kurt's arms, and he realized there must be some sort of flaw in the design of her room. Just then, one of Ulysses' agents reported that someone was approaching. Since those people would likely pass through the city, She considered asking them to deliver a message. As Ulysses stepped out to give instructions to her subordinate, Kurt sat back and thought. She had only taken Akiri away to protect everyone. But as always, he'd been selfish. He only thought about what he wanted. In his mind, he was always causing trouble for the people around him. If Akiri really was a dangerous monster, then his friends might be in danger too. Ulysses soon returned and reassured him no one had been wrong about the girl. No one could know where this story would lead, but they all had a duty to do their best and steer it toward a good ending. Hearing that, Kurt admitted to himself he really needed to start thinking about the future. But slowly, one day at a time. In the next scene, the person they had been waiting for finally appeared. It was an old man who mistook Ulysses for Kurt's servant and saw Kurt himself as a wandering hero destined to defeat the Demon King and save the world. Kurt and Akiri went along with it and promised to do just that, while Yuli stood there, completely baffled by whatever it was this old man was going on about. Seeing how excited the two of them are about that lunatic's ramblings, the lead adventurer makes it clear their group wasn't hired for this. Then, the old man's daughter arrives, apologizing for her father's behavior. She explains that he's always admired prophets who speak in riddles, and though he's clearly becoming a bit senile, maybe it's best to cut him some slack. Actually, she's the one who hired the team, though she's a bit surprised they sent a newlywed couple. That comment hits like a thunderbolt. Kurt and Ulysses freeze in shock, while Akiri stirs the pot even more by calling them Mom and Dad. Kurt immediately worries Yuli might be offended. After all, it can't be flattering for a woman to be mistaken as his wife. Still, whatever the case, he vows to make it up to her by doing a good job. With that in mind, he asks what their mission actually is. The woman explains that the pigs on her farm haven't been eating properly. Kurt figures it's probably the recent heat messing with their appetite, so he promises to whip up a feed that'll bring them back to the trough. Impressed by the young man's confidence, the farm owner announces she's going for a walk with her father, leaving the Eitlier Meister team in charge of the situation. After she leaves, Kurt notices Ulysses hasn't moved an inch since that newlyweds comment. She's been standing there like a statue. Anyway, Kurt gets to work and starts developing a special feed to stimulate the pig's appetite. Meanwhile, Yuli can't stop obsessing over what that woman said. How on earth could anyone think she and Kurt are a couple? There's a clear age gap. Whatever people may think, she reminds herself there's nothing inappropriate going on between her and Rockins. He's just someone she's assigned to protect. That's it. Even so, why does her chest still ache every time this subject comes up? Suddenly, a blue dragon sweeps through the sky, gliding straight toward Kurt. Ulysses immediately draws her sword and charges at the beast, but Kurt calmly tells her to put the weapon away. Instead of attacking, the dragon lands beside them and starts eating the feed Kurt prepared. Turning to Ulysses, Kurt explains, knowing full well she's from the city and probably has no idea that out here in the countryside, feeding pigs often attracts dragons looking for a snack. It happens all the time. Ulysses can't believe what she's hearing. Akiri, on the other hand, innocently asks if it's some kind of giant puppy. As Kurt explains that it's just a young flying lizard, the lead adventurer suddenly senses blood in the air. She darts off in the direction of the scent and finds one of her phantom comrades collapsed on the ground. At the same time, a shadowy figure cuts through the crops, approaching without a word. Instinctively, she draws her weapon and braces for the worst. Not long after, Kurt Rockins hears the clash of blades in the distance. He rushes toward the sound, but Ulysses tells him to run with Akiri instead. That's when a terrifying woman emerges from the field, her fists armed with claw-like blades. She demands they hand over the child. Kurt assumes she's some kind of dragon hunter, but Yuli knows better this is something far more dangerous. She orders him to escape immediately with the girl. He hesitates, but the young dragon grabs Kurt's shirt with its teeth and takes off into the sky. Ulysses can't help but smile. That boy actually managed to tame a creature said to be incapable of trusting humans. Back on the battlefield, the fight resumes. Ulysses faces the intruder head-on. But within seconds, she's knocked down hard. If this keeps up, she knows how it ends and it's not pretty. So she pushes herself back up, determined to rewrite the ending to this fight. She asks whether the enemy is after the dragon or the girl. The woman laughs and says it doesn't matter, Yuli won't live long enough for it to make a difference. Ulysses had only asked to buy time, but that tactic clearly failed. She's out of tricks. Now it's just her versus this overwhelming force. The battle reignites, but in the very first exchange, Ulysses loses her sword and takes a brutal slash that sends her crashing to the ground in pain. The enemy approaches slowly, sensing victory is near. But just as she closes in, Ulysses throws a magic crystal at her. The enemy slashes it mid-air. Far away, the farm owner hears the explosion echo across the landscape. She assumes it's just a minor landslide and keeps walking. Her father, though, mutters that it might have been an omen of chaos to come. Back at the site, the blast from the magical crystal leaves the field in ruins. Ulysses is sure it's over. But to her horror, the enemy emerges from the smoke completely unharmed. Only now, horns are visible on her head, and her ears are sharply pointed. Ulysses realizes the truth. She's up against a demon. A true monster of immense magical and physical power, humanity's natural enemy. But what is a demon doing here, of all places? They haven't been seen in over a century. The demon, clearly annoyed, says Ulysses' attack disrupted her transformation spell, something she hadn't planned for, but she can respect it coming from someone strong enough to defeat a demon lord. Ulysses is stunned. This enemy knows about that battle? That can only mean one thing. She's not after the dragon. She's after Akiri. And it gets worse. Yuli's out of weapons, out of strength. She's got nothing left but her fists and a brutal foe standing in front of her. If this is where she dies, so be it. She just hopes Kurt made it to the border town, because if he did, maybe Phantom and the Sakura will have a chance to fight back against this new threat. As for the chief adventurer herself, the gash in her stomach was far from superficial, and the blood she was losing made it clear her end was near. And yet, against all odds, it was none other than Kurt Rockins who returned, riding atop the back of the blue dragon. Not for long, of course. The kid ended up falling off the beast and crashing to the ground, his fall softened only by the leafy branches of a tree. But he wasn't the only reinforcement to show up. Moments later, an entire army of pigs from the farm came charging in at full speed. Without thinking twice, Kurt and Yuli each grabbed onto one of them to make their escape. Yuli, clinging to her ride, asked if this kind of thing, riding a dragon into battle against someone far stronger, was normal in the boys' village. Kurt admitted it was his first time doing something so stupid, though, he added, it's not uncommon for a man to act recklessly to protect a woman who's precious to him. That comment hit her like a bolt of lightning. Embarrassed, Ulysses tried to convince herself he only meant it in the sense of being allies, maybe close friends at most. And still, the feelings churning inside her were a messy cocktail of joy and sorrow. Truth be told, it was getting harder and harder to pretend she wasn't falling deeply in love with him. Then, an explosion tore through the herd of pigs. As the humans hit the ground and struggled back to their feet, they realized it was a spell cast by the demon woman. All the animals in the area had vanished. With no other option, Ulysses borrowed Kurt's dagger. She held her wound tightly, trying to stop the bleeding, and promised him she wouldn't die. Staggering toward their enemy, she turned to Kurt one last time. She'd given up on surviving not long ago, but he never gave up on keeping her alive. And because of that, she wasn't going to give up either. The demoness hurled a fireball at the wounded adventurer, who planned to carve a path through the flames with a magical slash. Honestly, she'd never managed to pull off that secret technique before, but this time it was do or die. And she did it. She managed to slash through the fire, but the flames, manipulated by the demon, quickly reformed, still dangerous. That's when Akiri jumped onto Yuli's head out of nowhere, catching the demoness off guard. For a moment, she looked less furious and more worried about accidentally killing the child. So, she undid her spell. Yuli figured it was Akiri who somehow stopped the attack. Meanwhile, the demoness suddenly coughed up blood and fled the scene in a panic. With the enemy gone, Ulysses finally collapsed. But before she hit the ground, Kurt caught her. He gave her some medicine while she was still conscious. It helped a little, but it was clear she was far from okay. For a second, she considered letting the pain swallow her whole. But suddenly, she jolted upright, demanding to know why Akiri had dropped onto her head in the middle of a life or death battle. Kurt explained that she hadn't fallen or flown there, she had just popped up on her fake mom's head out of thin air, like she'd used a teleportation crystal. That caught Ulysses off guard. Teleportation like that was something mages had been researching for years, but every attempt so far had failed. Even if it were possible, teleport crystals only work when there's a crystal already placed at the destination, and there was no such thing there for Akiri to use. Still thinking it over, Yuli asked Akiri to do the F-whoosh she was always going on about, suspecting that was what she'd done to appear on her head. Akiri said she couldn't do it now, but yes, she had gone F-whoosh and then pop, and suddenly she was on Mommy's head. Kurt, being honest, had no idea what was going on, so he brought the topic back to the demoness, hoping she really had fled far away. But just then, a pig approached looking more heartbroken than anything, which made Kurt realize it was time to take the herd back to the farm before the animals got recruited as backup for Vasco da Gama. A little while later, the jack of all trades had returned all the pigs to their pen, fully healed and eating better than ever, thanks to the special feed from Haste Village's one-man fix-it crew. The farm owner asked where Ulyshia's husband was, and Yuli awkwardly explained that Kurt had gone to thank a farm that had helped him out earlier. As for Kurt, he was soaring across the sky on his tamed dragon. When the beast alerted him to something unusual, he couldn't believe it and asked to be taken there right away. A few hours later, Ulyshia was riding in a carriage with Akiri. She asked the girl if she was the one who exploded the fireball earlier. Akiri said no, leading Yuli to conclude that it must have been the demoness who cancelled the spell to avoid harming a child. Still, she needed more answers. She needed to know, could Akiri really teleport? And that's when Kurt came swooping down from the sky, landing right in front of the carriage, with none other than the demoness herself unconscious slumped over the dragon's back. Naturally, everyone demanded to know how in the world he pulled that off. Kurt explained that the dragon had guided him to a spot in the forest where he found her lying on the ground. At first, he was stunned, but he smacked himself in the face to snap out of it and do what had to be done. Step 1. Light a fire. He needed to heat something up. The demoness woke up, too weak to even move, and asked what was going on. Kurt told her he was preparing medicine for her. She scoffed at the idea of sparing your enemies. It was pathetic. But Kurt reminded her she was the one who spared his allies. She cancelled her spell to protect Yuli and Akiri. That's the only reason he was helping. When the medicine was ready, he gave it to her. She drank it and immediately reacted as if it were poison. It hurt so much that Kurt figured he should have added a painkiller, though that would knock her out for 3 straight days. Since she couldn't talk back, he went ahead and called her out for trying to steal his dragon buddy. That's when she realized this kid had absolutely no clue what was really going on. Finally, worried about how the demon girl might react to the medicine, Kurt assures her she won't end up like Hildegard. The moment she hears that name, she freezes in shock, but the medicine kicks in and she passes out. After the journey, the group finally returns home. Sina and Lyslot wrap Akiri in a joyful embrace, clearly relieved after all their worry. Ulyshia, who had previously forbidden any contact between Lys and the child, steps in as if ready to enforce that rule, but ends up making an exception, at least for now. After all, it was Akiri who saved her life in that critical moment. Then, a strange man appears, someone the newcomers have absolutely no clue about. Yet, he seems to know both Kurt and Yuli by name. Lyslot explains that they're standing in front of the new local Aetlier Meister, and that revelation leaves the two visibly shaken. The man introduces himself as Rikudo, prompting Kurt to share his name as well. Rikudo reveals that he's already heard about the boy and thanks them for setting up such an incredible workshop for him. Suspicious of the stranger, Ulyshia asks Kurt to prepare dinner and sends Sina to take Akiri elsewhere. Once the 3 of them leave, Rikudo leans his arm against the carriage, right beside the chief adventurer's head in a way that feels invasive. The woman responds with a swift kick between the legs, but her foot goes right through him, as if his body were made of smoke. That's when Yuli realizes what's going on and admits she's impressed that Lyslot was able to create such a convincing illusion of a person who doesn't even exist. But Lys insists it's more than an illusion. To her, this boy does exist. That's exactly how she envisions Master Kurt will look when he turns 20. Just then, Ulyshia receives a message from Mimiko. She'll be arriving in 3 days with Akiri's test results. Cut to the next scene, the royal court mage has already arrived. Unfortunately, she reports that nothing conclusive was found. Ulysses questions why she came all this way just to say that. So the little mage gives her the full story. She ran tests using hair and saliva samples Ulysses had collected, but everything came back identical to those of a human. However, from the child's fingernail, she managed to extract a faint trace of a substance similar to magic crystal, a type of special magic that humans should be completely incapable of possessing. Records of spatial magic date back to the age of creation, but that magic has long been lost to history. Whatever this girl is, one thing is clear: she isn't human. She eats, speaks, and behaves like one, but she simply isn't. The best course of action, Mimiko says, is to seal her powers with a binding curse to prevent teleportation, and let her live at Mimiko's own workshop. Kurt, however, refuses. He argues that the feeling of safety you get around someone doesn't come from whether they're human or not, it comes from the kind of person they choose to be. Ulysses agrees. That girl saved her life once, and Lies joins in too. To her, Akiri is basically their daughter. She's far too precious to give up. Seeing their resolve, Mimiko relents. She asks them to take good care of the child. With that settled, the conversation shifts to the dragon hunter who attacked them. Kurt explains that she's currently locked in the basement storeroom, but asks Mimiko not to send her off to prison. Mimiko reminds him that they're dealing with a demon, humanity's natural-born enemy. Her punishment should be far worse than a prison cell. Mimiko descends into the basement where the hunter lies asleep. Before waking her, she injects something into her ankle. When the demon woman finally stirs, Mimiko asks how she's feeling. The demon replies coldly, warriors don't speak unless necessary. That's all the mage needs to provoke her. She teases, asking if the woman always talks like that, or if it's just part of her tough girl act. Instantly, the demon bursts into spontaneous flames, her body engulfed in violent fire, but the blaze dies down just as quickly. Mimiko isn't impressed. She makes it clear, magic won't work here. The room's sealed by a barrier. She asks if the demon has any allies nearby who might come to her rescue. The woman replies that a loser must obey the winner, but in this case, it wasn't this girl who beat her, it was that freakishly strong kid. So, Kurt Rockins is brought down to the storeroom, accompanied by Ulysses and Lyslot. He gently asks how the prisoner is feeling, and she replies she's fine aside from the rope tied around her arms. Kurt apologizes, but says plainly, he can only untie her if she tells them what they need to know. Without hesitation, she gives them a name, Hildegard. Ulysses asks who that is, and Kurt recalls a merchant's daughter who often visited his old village. She was part of the horned folk just like this woman, so he figured they might know each other. Lies is confused by the term horned folk, and Mimiko explains that's how demons refer to themselves. The prisoner then asks if Hildegard wore a griffin crest. Kurt thinks hard, then nods yes, she did. At that, the woman becomes visibly agitated. She declares that she wants to save Lady Hildegard, who's currently being held captive in the castle of Margrave Takon. Kurt is shaken by the revelation and turns to Ulysses, saying they have to save her. But Yuli remains skeptical this demon could be lying. And if she really wanted to save Hildegard, why was she after Akiri? Kurt is furious at the revelation, so the prisoner explains herself. She was investigating the Margrave's motives and learned that he was tracking everyone in their group. Then, one day, she saw that strange child suddenly appear inside the carriage and thought perhaps that power could help her rescue her friend. Even so, while Kurt seems willing to trust her, Ulysses remains doubtful. So the demon makes a bold request: check the pendant resting between her breasts. Yuli does, and everyone sees that the woman is wearing a necklace with Hildegard's crest. The demon explains that Hildegard gave it to her personally. In fact, the only reason she stopped her spell that day was because she saw that same crest on the dagger Ulysses was holding. Kurt adds that he also received that dagger from little Hildegard herself. One way or another, the group starts to believe the demon's story. The crest is proof enough. With that, Mimiko makes her decision. They'll go rescue Hildegard. But the prisoner stays right where she is. If she escapes or dies, they'll consider Hildegard lost for good. Moved by her plight, Kurt pleads with her not to run away. The demon finally speaks her name, Solflare. Apparently, she's come to trust him. Kurt lights up at her honesty, but right then, Akiri suddenly appears between them, looking startled and wide-eyed after accidentally going F-whoosh again. Finally, Kurt turns to Mimiko and confesses that, yes, he truly wants to save Hildegard, but he has no idea how to do it. Mimiko places a hand on his shoulder. That's not just his problem anymore. It's all of theirs now. Soon after, she leads her allies to another location to go over the plan. With the Margrave's mansion blueprint laid out across the table, she says the target's full name out loud, Takon Tanga Kokiluka. Ulicia immediately wants to know how the hell that girl managed to get her hands on the blueprint. But the mage brushes off the question and continues the man's wife, Lady Farnard, died 10 years ago, shortly before giving birth to their eldest daughter, Famil, who passed away last year due to illness. Inside that mansion, there's one room that only Takon himself is allowed to enter, but Mimiko has seen him carrying food there before. Solflare adds that the room was locked tight, she couldn't get it open. Mimiko chimes in that even Phantom couldn't break in, and for a skilled bounty hunter, that says a lot. Lyslot suggests they make Takon open the door himself, since no one there could force their way in. They could do that by creating a fake virtual thief, someone who supposedly broke into the secret room using magic. That way, the Margrave would be forced to open the door himself to deal with the intruder. Rikudo could take part in this part of the plan. As for Takon, he's set to attend a 3-day festival next week. They could use that as a cover, make an official visit to the city so he can tour their Meister workshop. Ulicia worries about leaving Kurt alone with a demon, but Lies suggests they invite Rockins to join them, under the pretense of researching the local market and evaluating the quality of goods. At that point, both Lies and Yuli start to see this trip as an opportunity to spend time with Kurt, and just that is enough to get them fired up. Lies decides they'll execute the main part of the plan on the 3rd day of the event, when the guards will be the most exhausted. The market research should be done on the first 2 days. They play rock, paper, scissors to decide who will handle the first day of research, and Lies bursts with joy when she wins. With everything settled, the group sets off at dusk in their carriage. Rikudo chuckles when he sees Akiri is coming too, and Kurt explains he did tell her to stay and watch over the workshop with the Sakuras. Also, he expresses regret over the whole Hildegard situation, but Rikudo assures him there's no need to worry. If a noble in this country really did kidnap and imprison a woman, then as a member of the royal family, he cannot allow that to stand. Kurt is stunned by the revelation, while Lies internally panics, realizing she let this ghost run wild. Rikudo quickly pulls it together and asks the boy to keep it a secret. For now, things seem smoothed over, especially given Kurt's innocence and reliability. That night, the group arrives at their destination. Rikudo parts ways to get ready for the visit. Ulicia tells Kurt to look after Lies and Akiri, she's going to investigate the Margrave Takon herself. Kurt offers to help with the investigation, but Lies cuts in, furious, and makes it clear he's going to the festival with her. Market research is an important job, after all. Besides, he should be thinking about Akiri, who would love to walk around the festival with her dad. Backed into a corner, Rockins promises to make sure his daughter has the best time ever. At sunrise, the event kicks off in full swing, filled with the cheerful energy of the townsfolk packing the streets. Stalls were everywhere, selling all sorts of food and goods, and music played from every corner. Lyslot's eyes light up when she spots a spineless cactus for sale, a specialty from Torsion, the desert nation. When you cut it open, it releases a sweet, delicious water. Without a second thought, Kurt grabs a seat and orders 2 of them, one for Akiri and one for Lies. Lies asks why he didn't get one for himself, but he just smiles and says he's fine with whatever's left. Akiri tastes hers and loves it, then passes it to her dad to try. When he sips from the cactus, the girl finds it cute but Lyslot. She thinks it's the most beautiful thing she's ever seen in her life. In fact, she insisted on handing hers to him earlier, and when he gives it back, she searches for where his lips touch the fruit, and drinks from that exact spot on purpose. And just to top it off, she stores the cactus away in her bag as a keepsake. Kurt gets a little weirded out by her behavior and threatens to throw the thing away, which only earns him a furious glare. Realizing she went too far, Lies pulls herself together and claims the cactus is a rare, non-native fruit, she just wanted a sample. After that little stunt, they resume their stroll. Lies brings up that she heard Kurt traveled all over the country back when he was an adventurer. He nods, but explains that he was mostly stuck doing maintenance on their equipment, and parking the carriage at stables never got to be part of the more glamorous parts of the journey. Aniplot expresses regret, but Kurt doesn't seem bothered, quite the opposite. He figures someone with that kind of job wouldn't be able to enjoy festivals anyway. It's just how things were. Still, part of him probably wished he could have experienced it. But right now, he's happy just to spend the whole day with Akiri and her friend. Hearing that, Lies takes his hand and says that the three of them are going to make the most of today's festival. Deep down, she's determined to make this day unforgettable for Kurt. At one of the stalls, a merchant was holding a challenge. Anyone who could match the weight of a small metal plate by filling a bowl with the exact same weight in red beans would win 10 kilos of red beans for free. Kurt takes on the challenge and wins, something the vendor didn't think anyone could actually pull off. After that, they continue wandering from booth to booth, enjoying the food and games together. As evening falls, they head to a quiet park away from the crowds, walking along the moat that surrounds the castle. It was Liza's idea. Of course, she wanted to set the perfect scene for her love confession. Everything feels just right. She steps closer to Kurt, ready to finally speak her heart until she realizes she screwed up. The Margrave's mansion is right there, completely visible in the background. Putting that aside, Kurt seemed unusually deep in thought. So, she asked if he was worried about Hildegard. But he assured her he trusted the word of his allies who had promised to save their friend. The truth was, what really bothered him was the feeling that he usually couldn't do much to help. Lies reminded him that he was the one who broke her curse, not to mention the meals he made, meals everyone loved. Even so, Kurt kept acting like any of those things could have been done by someone else, like there was nothing special about him. Wanting to comfort her friend somehow, but knowing that just denying what he'd said wouldn't make him believe he mattered, Aniplot chose honesty instead. She told him she adored him deeply, and she wasn't the only one. Ulycia, Sina, Cans, Danzo, Akiri. They all cared about him. Even Mimiko, Ophelia, and Rikudo did. And that, by the way, was why everyone was so committed to the mission to save Hildegard. It was because they all cared about Rockens enough to do something that important for him. Hearing such a heartfelt and spontaneous confession from his companion brought Kurt to tears, and Lies added that everyone contributes in their own way, doing what they do best. Kurt had his place in the group because he was so helpful and dependable. Then Akiri chimed in, saying she was hungry, pulling the focus away from the conversation. Things may not have gone quite the way Lies had planned, but at least she got to see a smile on Master Kurt's face. Either way, she promised herself next time it'll be different. Next time, she'll tell him exactly how she feels. The next day, Ulycia asks Kurt to craft a new sword for her, since she lost hers during the battle against the demoness. The boy sets off in search of mithril and adamantite alloys so he can work on the weapon using a local blacksmith's forge. When Kurt mentions he'll be forging the sword in a small pot, the blacksmith thinks it's a joke. With a smug grin, he even offers to lend the boy his trusted tools, clearly not taking him seriously. But a few hours later, when Ulycia tests the weapon and slices clean through a giant rock, the master blacksmith is left speechless. Staring in awe, he realizes he still has a long way to go because no matter how skilled you are, there's always someone better out there. Stunned, he sets off on a journey for professional redemption. Meanwhile, innocent as ever, Kurt casually remarks to his friend about how intense that guy is. Speaking of which, Rocken also admits he needs to improve his own skills. Ulycia, on the other hand, examines her new blade. As the light gleams off the steel, it resembles flowers wrapped in snow, so she decides to name it Snowflake. Later that day, Yuli gets dressed up to go study the market with Kurt, though in her heart, she knows it's the perfect excuse to sneak in a disguised date. When they meet up, they laugh about how Akiri didn't wake up at all to join them. She was buzzing with excitement all day yesterday because of the festival, so they decided to just let her sleep. Ulycia celebrates the rare chance to be alone with a boy she's crushing on. And even though she doesn't know where Lies took him yesterday, she's an adventurer. She knows all the city's hidden gems. She's confident she can win his heart her own way. While she's caught up in these thoughts, three thugs are tearing apart a family-owned shop for some unknown reason. Yuli pretends not to see it. This is her date, and she doesn't have time to deal with other people's problems. But Kurt, of course, walks right into the mess and confronts the troublemakers, making Yuli realize that her peaceful date is officially over. Kurt asks the men what they're doing, and one of them says the meat buns from this place are disgusting. That's why they're wrecking the store so no one else has to suffer through that slop. Hearing this, Kurt picks up one of the buns and tells the shop owner he'll buy it. After paying, he takes a bite and loves it. He says the meat filling is way above average. One of the thugs, a short guy, shoves him and scoffs, saying, "What are you, a food critic?" Ulysses catches Kurt to stop him from falling and shoots back. He's not a food critic, he works at an atelier. That name drop hits hard. The thugs' freeze ateliers are always tied to nobles and powerful folks. They panic and run off before things can get worse. With the troublemakers gone, Kurt checks on the shop owner and realizes he's got a fractured bone. Yuli suggests some medicine would do the trick, but Kurt insists on taking him to a nearby hospital. It'll be better than any makeshift cure he could whip up. Ulysses was about to argue, but the boy just lifts the man up and carries him off. And just like that, her romantic afternoon goes down the drain. Still, she puts her disappointment aside to comfort the shop owner's daughter, who suddenly bursts into tears after all the chaos. As she consoles the child, Yuli spots a woman in the plaza selling spineless sweet cacti. It's Phantom. She invites the girl to go have one. When they approach, Phantom mentions there'll be a cooking contest later that afternoon between food stalls. Gargel's restaurant two-time champion is the favorite to win again. But this year, a humble little meat bun stall is joining the competition for the first time, and it might just turn the tables. Word is, someone hired those thugs to sabotage the bun vendor. Ulysses is fuming she lost her date because of this nonsense. Still, there's a chance she can get things back on track once Kurt returns. When he finally does, Rakan explains that the shop owner's injuries were worse than they thought. He'll have to stay at the hospital until tomorrow. Faced with this situation, Kurt, the all-round handyman of Haste Village, promises the man that he'll help out at the shop in his absence. At this point, Ulysses watches her last sliver of hope float away like leaves in the wind. And there's no doubt who's behind all of this: Gargel's restaurant. With nothing else to do and full of spite for that smug restaurant, she decides to join the contest herself and beat those guys at their own game. Kurt asks what contest she's talking about, and the shop owner's daughter says there's no way they can win. The thugs tossed out all the meat filling for their buns. Yuli reassures the girl and turns to Kurt, asking if he can come up with a new filling recipe. He thinks he can. She then asks the child's name and learns it's Luna. Yuli tells Kurt to teach Luna how to make the new recipe. Her father would be proud if she played a key role in saving their shop. Luna promises to give it her all. Kurt then asks Yuli to go buy as many ripe, spineless cacti as she can from the shop on the main avenue. He also needs her to grab the red beans he won as a prize yesterday from the inn. While she does that, Kurt asks someone for a shovel so he can start digging right there in the plaza. Ulysses hesitates. This is the Lord's Plaza, after all, but Kurt promises it won't cause any trouble. Later, during the festival, people try the donuts from Gargel's stall and fall in love. Some of the judges, munching away, say it's exactly what they expected from the top contender, the stall poised to win for a third year in a row. One of them even tries to convince the others that no one can compete with Gargel. Meanwhile, the smug owner of the most popular stall grins. That particular judge? He's on his payroll, so yeah, this year's victory is basically in the bag. However, the cook overhears some people talking about how delicious the dumplings are from another food stall, ones with an unusually dark filling. Customers are raving about the soft dough and the nostalgic flavor of these treats coming straight from a stall called Full Moon Dumplings. Panic hits Gargel. He suddenly remembers he had hired goons to destroy that very stall. He bolts toward the place he'd ordered to be wiped out, only to find it still standing and bustling with unfamiliar faces behind the counter. Not just that the place is packed wall to wall with customers, a clear sign of its booming popularity during the festival. The judges approach Gargel, casually mentioning that Full Moon Dumplings are creating quite the buzz. But the cook quickly snaps, accusing the dark filling of being spoiled due to its black color. Overhearing the conversation, Luna steps in and calmly tells the judges that yes, the filling is indeed dark, but she asks them to give it a fair try. It's made from sweetened red beans, boiled and strained into a paste, a traditional Eastern treat called anko. the corrupted judge takes a whiff and picks up a faint fruity aroma. Luna explains that's the scent of thornless cactus fruit. As Kurt had explained, this fruit absorbs more sugar as it ripens, while its juice turns bitter. But if you cube the fruit, add water, squeeze it, and boil it, it creates a delicious cactus syrup. Luna blended this syrup with the cooked red beans to create a sweet, rich anko. Intrigued by the story, the judges taste the dumplings and are blown away by the unique, unforgettable flavor. Plus, each dumpling only costs a single copper coin. Still suspicious, Gargil decides to try one himself, and the moment he takes a bite, it's like his taste buds ascend to heaven. A loud, joyful grin spreads across his face. Moments later, Ulysses arrives to ask what the judges thought. One of the judges, amazed, asks what the secret is behind the dough's incredible softness. Yuli responds that the temporary shop owner took this task a bit too seriously, and according to what he taught her, if you make the dough with water and baking soda, then steam it, you get that wonderfully fluffy texture. Gargil growls, demanding to know where she got baking soda. The adventurer replies, "From the hot springs." These buns were kneaded and steamed using thermal water drawn right from the underground springs in the area. In other words, they're hot spring dumplings. Scoffing, Gargil insists there aren't any hot springs around here, but Yuli says Kurt just dug one out earlier, using his 8-layer skills. Now visibly shaken, Gargil threatens to report the excavation to Margrave Takon. But Ulysses pulls out an official document. Princess Lyslot herself authorized the excavation. The man's eyes twitch as he sees the royal seal, undeniable proof that she's telling the truth. What's more, she says the new hot spring will now be managed by the city as a relaxation area, soon to be known as an Ashy U, and who knows, maybe it'll even become a tourist attraction someday. Faced with everything unraveling before him, Gargil snaps. He discreetly reminds the corrupt judge of the fat bribe he was paid to rig the competition. But the judge, now fully convinced, refuses the money outright. He says he simply can't give a bad score to full moon dumplings. And just when things couldn't get worse for him, Gargil spots the 3 thugs he hired, hiding in a nearby alley. Furious, he storms after them to demand answers for their failure. But when he reaches the alley, he's met with a shocking twist. The 3 men are actually lies and 2 phantom spies in magical disguise. According to the princess, the real henchmen are already under arrest. Ulysses appears behind Gargil and reveals a far darker truth. He's been supplying chefs to the Margrave, and word is, he's been serving leftover scraps to customers in his own restaurant. Worse yet, he's been mixing in addictive substances to keep customers hooked, which, of course, is completely illegal. Now disguised as Gargil, Lies explains that all it took was showing up in his skin for the chefs to spill everything. Completely cornered, Gargil pulls a cleaver from his uniform and lunges at Lyslot, but a phantom spy effortlessly disarms him. Ulysses declares that he'll be arrested for treason, and Lies finally reveals her true identity as the 3rd princess of the Kingdom of Homiros, making it clear there's no escape for him now. As he's dragged away by the aristocrat spies, Gargil stares into the void, wondering how things spiraled so far out of control, how he ended up trying to stab a princess over some dumplings. Once he's gone, Lies teases Ulysses for missing her date with Kurt. But Yuli doesn't take the bait. She simply says she's happy to have seen Kurt and Luna smiling. Honestly, when you're in Rockin', just spending the day there already means expecting some chaos at any moment. Meanwhile, over in the Margrave's office, Takon is stunned to learn that Gargil was arrested for threatening Princess Lyslot Homiros with a knife, and that the chefs he appointed were taken away for corruption as well. Fuming, Takon reminds everyone that the princess is coming again tomorrow, and they'll need cooks for the tea gathering. One of his subordinates suggests showcasing the food stall that won the culinary festival as the main attraction. According to the judge's report, a sweet dumpling was declared the winner, a perfect match for a tea party. Agreeing with the idea, Takon instructs them to bring the cook responsible for the dumpling to his mansion first thing in the morning. After his aide leaves, Takon reflects on his conversation with Lyslot earlier that day, when he granted her permission to dig up the plaza. As she was leaving, he admitted it was odd for her to visit him so often, considering her royal status. Shouldn't it be the other way around? Still, Lies just smiled and told him not to worry, she'd be back tomorrow with the 8-layer Meister. And now, Takon can't help but wonder, Has that girl figured out what he's really up to? Either way, this might be his only chance to meet the Meister in person and finally share his deepest wish. The next morning, the border town group gathers again, and Kurt hands Rikudo the market research report they worked on the day before. Ulysses then unrolls the floor plan of Takon's mansion to lay out the rescue plan for Hildegard. According to the veteran adventurer, their target is being held beyond the kitchen, locked away in a room. It's technically possible to bring her food without drawing suspicion, but the door's lock is too complex to get through. So, Rikudo's best option is to find proof that Hildegard is being held captive, and then use that to persuade Takon to release her. The fake 8-Lear Meister gives his word to Kurt he'll do everything he can to bring his friend back safely. Grateful, Kurt takes Akiri with him to help out at Luna's shop. That's when Lies reveals that the version of her they've been talking to this whole time was just a projection. Her real body materializes in the room. Seeing this, Yuli notes to herself that the butterfly blade must be unsheathed for Lies to maintain her illusions, but there's no way she can walk into a meeting with the Margrave holding a drawn weapon. And then there's the issue of physical objects passing through illusions. To get around both problems, they come up with a strategy. Lyslot will create an illusion of Rikudo, and a version of herself without the butterfly blade in hand. Then she'll turn invisible. The invisible Lies will support the illusions in a way that makes it seem like they're actually holding and interacting with objects. With the plan in place, the adventurer and the princess hop into a carriage and head to the meeting. Along the way, Lies casts the 2 pre-programmed illusions while Yuli receives a message from Phantom. Apparently, Kurt and Akiri have just been hired as chefs by Margrave Takon, and the 2 of them have already made it into the castle kitchen. Faced with this sudden twist, Lies and Ulysses are left wondering whether they should laugh or cry. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.